Chapter 1. Awakened Dream. Suffice to say, Ms. Midoriya, your son is never going to have an active quirk factor. That statement from the doctor crushed Izuku. His hopes, his dreams, everything. The conversation happening between the doctor and his mother became dull and slurred, merely background noise. Izuku doesn't know how long he was like that, but he somehow ended up back home at the family computer, watching All Might's debut on repeat. He heard something behind him, likely the door. Swiveling around in the chair, he stared at his mom through tear-clouded vision, her face contorted with sadness. "See, can I be a hero too, Mom?" he squeaked out. "Can I be just like All Might?" Her eyes flashed with something Izuku couldn't quite recognize before she quickly made her way across the room to him. "Oh, Izuku, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." She kept talking, but Izuku had already stopped listening, his tears flowing harder than before. He felt his mom's arms around his small frame, but they just weren't as warm as they used to be. Being quirkless, as Izuku realized, isn't really all that bad. At least, it isn't when you don't attract any attention to yourself like he did today. Currently, his most zealous tormentor was right up in his face in an alley on the way home from school. Katsuki Bakugu, or Kaken, as Izuku used to call him, had cornered him with his gang of followers after school and dragged him here. "Who the hell are you trying to fool, Deku? Teach said that you were still planning on going to UA after high school. What the fuck is that about?" Katsuki's words didn't hurt as much as they used to, but the small explosions coming from his palms sure do. "You will never be able to go there, you quirkless loser. Get that through your thick skull for once in your damn life," he screamed, shoving him to the ground with an explosion. Izuku was seeing stars, but at this point just taking the hit and staying quiet would probably appease the explosion user enough to leave him be. "Hey, and stay down!" one of the cronies following Katsuki yelled, before quickly following behind their leader. Staying down sounds pretty good right now to Izuku. Alas, he had to get home before his mother worried. Leaning upward with a grunt, Izuku picked up his charred backpack from the ground next to him and slowly got to his feet. "Damn, that's gonna be hard to explain to Mom," Izuku mumbled, brushing some excess ash from his shoulder where Katsuki had grabbed him. As he finally got the will to walk back towards the main street, however, he heard a distinct click. Looking up, he saw a man just taller than him, his face hidden by his hoodie and bandana. "Give me your wallet, kid. Just make this quick and easy," the man ordered, raising the gun he had in his slightly higher. "Do it, now." Now, Izuku was certifiably afraid. This wasn't some bully or jerk. This guy was armed and probably couldn't care too much about hurting a kid. "Okay, sir. One moment, please." Shakily, but slowly, Izuku reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He held it in front of him, the man swiping it from his hand before slowly backing up. "Now stay there for a few minutes. Don't need you calling for some help now, do we?" the man asked, his grip tightening on the pistol. Izuku nodded quickly, beads of sweat rolling down his face from the early fall heat. The man grunted and put the gun in his hoodie pocket before turning quickly and jogging away. The moment the man was gone, Izuku collapsed back onto the ground, taking deep breaths. All that was left in the alley now was Izuku, but his body was running on high alert, blood rushing to his ears. He could see people walking back and forth at the exit of the alley. Not a single one noticed the lone boy on the ground, and so, in true Midoriya fashion, he cried. Through sniffling breaths, Izuku pulled out his phone and sent a text to his mom that he would be home late, saying he had gotten detoured by a bad car accident. "Holy crap. My heart is beating so hard I think it might break my ribs. Why is it only me who has the absolute worst luck?" After a moment of gathering his courage, he carefully made his way to the entrance of the alley, looking around to see if he was being watched. The street wasn't all that busy, only a few cars passing every few seconds with moderate amounts of people walking on the sidewalks. The late afternoon sun was already behind a few of the taller buildings housing shops and apartments. The man in the hoodie was nowhere to be found, however, already long gone. Breathing a heavy sigh of relief, Izuku decided to begin the arduous trek home. To be fair, it was only about a 20-minute walk from school to home and was just under halfway there. Now that his adrenaline from being mugged at gunpoint wore off, he was beginning to realize just how tired he was. He figured that he might as well go to bed right after dinner tonight. Well, hopefully he can. Izuku, sweetie, are you okay? Did you get hurt? The moment he was inside and had his shoes off, Inko was all over him. I'm fine, Mom. Please, just a bit tired. That accident made me take the long way home, he said with a half-hearted chuckle, hugging his mom to calm her down before letting her go. Inko was worried sick when Izuku texted her. He is almost never home late, and with such a bad excuse as a bad car accident, there had to be something wrong. Looking him up and down, she could clearly tell that he was completely exhausted and had some dirt and grime on his pants. Izuku dear, was Katsuki bothering you again? She asked, but the worry now had a bit of anger mixed in. Izuku was quick to start vigorously waving his arms around with wide eyes, a large amount of nose and not hims mixed in. She sighed before her mind registered what he had said. Wait, what do you mean? Not him? Is someone else bothering you? Izuku froze, and this time Inko could see clear as day that something was wrong. She bored into him, trying to imagine what it could be. He was clearly pondering something until he finally broke, his eyes becoming glossy. Izuku mumbled something, but seeing that she couldn't hear him, decided to speak up to a volume louder than a whisper. I got mugged at gunpoint, Mom. Inko was speechless, her mind wrapping around what her baby boy just said. That moment lasted about 2 seconds before she was bawling, crushing her precious son in her arms. After several minutes of Izuku trying to bring his panicking mother back to earth, she finally calmed down enough to have them both go and sit down. He told her everything that happened in the alley minus the parts that had Katsuki and his group in them. Why didn't you call the police? She uttered, tears still running down her face. The police wouldn't have been able to do anything. The guy was long gone, and to be honest, I was freaking out a bit too much for me to catch what his face looked like. Though it doesn't help that he had it hidden behind a bandana. She sat in silence for a moment, wiping her face clear of tears. She added the used tissue to the almost full garbage bin, which she had been steadily filling over the last few minutes. His mom looked at him, her eyes looking into his own. Izuku, all that matters is that you are okay. I just don't know what I would do if you had gotten hurt. Izuku smiled softly and brought his mother into a deep hug. He spoke, just loud enough for her to hear. You mean the world to me too, Mom, and I promise to avoid situations like that as best I can. After the warm embrace, Inko went about plating the chicken katsu that she finished just prior to Izuku's arrival. For the first time since Izuku got home, he felt completely at peace, the only sounds coming from the 2 members of the Midoriya household enjoying their dinner. With every bite he took of his mother's wonderful cooking, the heaviness of his eyelids only grew. Izuku fought valiantly, but he realized he was fighting a losing battle when he ended up trying to eat a small bite of chicken just to drop it and shove a chopstick up his nostril. He needed sleep, thankfully. His mom quietly got up and began packing up Izuku's leftovers in a Tupperware container with a soft, "Go ahead and get some rest." His body complied by activating his bedtime routine on autopilot. He brushed his teeth, changed, and could immediately get some sleep. No worries in his mind, only the final thought that tomorrow was a weekend. Well, that and the fact that Tupperware was still in use somehow after 200 years. Izuku, to say the least, was cursing his luck. He kept waking in a cold sweat. The only dreams coming to him were vivid images of the masked man and his gun, pointing straight at him. Every detail of the sleek black pistol coming to mind. He tossed and turned, almost like a fever dream. At some point during the night, however, Izuku felt his phone jamming into his stomach. Reaching down with his hand, he mentally reminded himself to set his phone somewhere other than on the bed. When he went to grab the source of his irritation, however, it didn't feel like a phone. He tugged once, twice, even 3 times. It just wouldn't move. In fact, his side felt like it was being pulled by his hand, when he was most assuredly holding something that was hard and likely plastic. He decided, admittedly badly due to a lack of awareness, to yank on the offending object as hard as he could, giving him a nice jolt of pain up his side of his troubles. Finally achieving some semblance of awareness due to the shock of pain, he looked down to see that there was something moderately rectangular in shape sticking out of his side. His eyes widened, however, as he shot his other hand out to turn on his desk lamp, giving some light to the pitch-black room. Barely holding back a scream of terror, he realized that he was holding the grip to a gun. Izuku shot out of bed, trying to fiddle with the foreign object currently protruding from his stomach. His analytical mind suddenly kicked into overdrive, completely ignoring any sleeplessness he was feeling at the moment. The grip looks like it's fused with me buddy Bathauka, mitas eventher Rito Beganithan Dwididentino. Izuku? His mother grumbled, standing in the doorway and rubbing her eyes, adjusting to the bright light coming from his desk lamp. Honey, it's 3 in the morning, what dash? She began to ask, but stopped as her eyes grew wider and wider, focusing on the object currently fused with Izuku's side. What is that? The two Midoriyas looked at each other, completely silent and admittedly still processing what in the world was even happening. Izuku breathed in a deep breath before slowly uttering, Mom, don't freak out, but I think this might be my quirk. Blink. Your what? My quirk. It took every ounce of energy Izuku had to be able to rush forward to catch his fainting mother before she collided with the cruel, unforgiving floor. After dropping her off on the bed, Izuku came to the realization that he might have almost shot himself. Unlike his mother, however, there was nobody around that was able to catch him. Chapter 2, One in the Chamber. As far as mornings go, this one was somehow terrible and amazing at the same time. Sure, being awoken by your teary-eyed mother is naturally a bad thing, but the possible manifestation of a quirk had Izuku's inner self practically screaming like the world was ending. Actually, the world ending probably wouldn't be the worst thing that could happen to him. Izuku, are you okay? I fainted and I'm sorry Toha dash. He shot up quickly and hugged his mother, immediately cutting off the Midoriya family's patented muttering technique. Mom, it's all right. I'm okay, you're okay. Well, maybe we are both freaking out, but physically we are fine. Inko looked up and down at her son, wiping the remaining tears from her eyes. Her vision, however, focused once again on why this whole mess was happening to begin with. I think we need to pay a visit to the Dr. Izuku dear, because whatever is going on here is not normal. Izuku followed his mother's eyes to where she was looking, and suddenly remembered the foreign object currently jutting out from his abdomen. The polished black grip of some sort of pistol was still there, in the exact same position as he had left it. His mind working overdrive on all the details, cataloging any feelings, sensations, or lack thereof that his brain was processing. Why yeah, that is probably a good idea. A hop, skip, and a jump later we find the Midoriya family currently sitting in the waiting area of Mizudafu General Hospital, awaiting for the doctor to come retrieve them for testing. It was quite the difficult process explaining to the receptionist the problem, though once she saw the object on request that Izuku lift up his shirt, she had them sit down as she called for one of the doctors. Seeing as it is still somewhere around 5 in the morning, Izuku, even in his wound-up state, attempted to try and get some rest to make up for the sleepless night he had. He must have drifted off at some point, because he was brought back to the waking world when he felt his mother gently elbowing him in the side. Upon opening his weary eyes, he immediately gained another surge of energy as he saw a bald, darker-skinned man in a doctor's uniform who appeared to be in his late 50s walking towards them. Hello there. My name is Dr. Haruai. You must be the Midoriyas? The man supplied, taking a quick glance at the tablet in his hand. Yes, doctor, Inko replied. We believe that my son here may have manifested a quirk of some sort. Both Izuku and Inko were now standing, following the doctor as he motioned to follow them while typing into the tablet. Is there any pain, discomfort, or other sensation occurring at this moment? I would say there is something happening at this point, sir, replied Izuku. There is currently the grip of what appears to be a pistol protruding from my abdomen, though it only really is discomforting if you try to remove it. The doctor stopped after about a minute of walking down the hospital corridors and opened the door to a small examination room. Come on in here. And if you don't mind, could you remove your shirt, Mr. Midoriya? Giving the doctor a quick nod, Izuku sat on the bed and removed his shirt, while his mother went and sat on a chair in the corner. Putting gloves on, Dr. Haruai stated, If any force I apply causes discomfort, please let me know. He then proceeded to gently touch and prod areas around the object and the grip itself. The beginning of the examination progressed much like that, with Dr. Haruai going down the list of basic procedures like measuring heartbeat, blood pressure, etc. After taking Izuku's height and weight down, the doctor took a blood sample from his arm and put it in a machine sitting on the counter. This device here is called a Quirk factor stimulator. It's actually quite new and uses specific electrical impulses to see if the blood's underlying Quirk factor responds or not. If it responds, then we know for sure that you have an active Quirk factor, the man explained, seeing the curiosity glistening in both of the Midoriya's eyes. It is the most accurate method we have of Quirk detection so far, making even the toe joint rule obsolete, as even that older rule has only roughly 70% accuracy. What a useful device, doctor. Who invented it? I haven't seen it in the news or any of the magazines I read, Inko asked, watching the machine intently as it processed the blood. Well, the device itself was manufactured by Hatsum Industries, though I suppose that would be led back to their head engineer Mako Hatsum. Though the doctor stopped when a distinct beep was heard from the machine. Looking down at his tablet, a small grin appeared on his face as he looked up at Izuku. Well, the numbers don't lie. It appears that you have a Quirk. Congratulations. Inko never thought she would have seen the way her son's eyes lit up like they are right now ever again in her lifetime. It took exactly 1 second before both Midoriyas were letting loose their tears, where the doctor kindly proceeded to give both of them a box of tissues. Where he got them, that's not important. It took the both of them a minute to calm back down, though their emotions were still running high. Well, doctor, how do we find out what it is? Izuku asked, wiping his face with another tissue. For that, let's figure out exactly what led up to your Quirk activating, as it appears that the object likely being produced from your body is only partially complete. So, with a quiet nod from his mother, Izuku told the doctor of the events of the last day, and of how he felt like he simply couldn't get any sleep last night due to his nightmares. He explained how he only noticed the pistol grip sticking out of him when he tried to grab and pull on it, thinking it was his phone. The doctor merely listened attentively, not asking any questions, but taking notes on the tablet. Once Izuku finished, the doctor looked at his tablet for a moment longer, writing some finishing touches before looking back up. Could you try imagining the gun that man held at you, if you are okay with doing so? Izuku nodded and closed his eyes, going back to the dark alley. He imagined the man and then the gun he held, his polished black metal and textured grip. Then, however, he started seeing some details he doesn't think he remembered. He saw the ridges and grooves on the slide and the rifling within the barrel. He could just barely see the 9mm marking engraved in the side of the gun. His eyes shot open, however, when he heard a loud clicking noise come from the tiled floor. Izuku! His mother called out, shooting up quickly from her chair. Looking down, he saw the doctor gingerly pick up the completed black pistol from the floor, looking it over carefully. With slow movements, the doctor unloaded the magazine and checked the chamber to ensure there was no bullet loaded, before setting the 2 items down on the counter. The doctor then began looking Izuku over as Inko hovered behind him. How are you feeling right now? Are you tired? In pain? Uncomfortable? Izuku thought for a moment, feeling himself out, and realized that he suddenly felt somewhat tired again. I'm feeling kinda tired, Dr. Haruai, but otherwise I feel fine. That's very good. I'm going to take another blood sample now to compare to earlier to see how it affected your body's nutritional health. The doctor then took another syringe and eased it into Izuku's arm. Looking at himself, Izuku saw that there were no abnormalities, no objects sticking out of his body or any other weird occurrence. Is my son okay, doctor? What about his Quirk? Is it a danger to his health? His mother asked, releasing several questions she had been holding in until the doctor had finished looking Izuku over. Well, Ms. Midoriya, it would appear that your son has some sort of emitter-type creation Quirk from what we have gathered so far, but at this point it would be best if you came back with an appointment later today. That way I can give his blood a look over, and so I can prepare some tests to see just what his Quirk can do. The doctor paused and gave a smile to Izuku as he stood up. But either way, I'd say you have quite the Quirk here, young man. Take care, you two, and I'll see you later. Yup, that was it. The dam of emotions Izuku had been holding back the entire visit just shattered like a pane of glass. Tears were shed, his mother immediately responding to her son's activation of his tear glands with her own. The doctor was quick to hand them tissues, but immediately started looking for towels to clean up the puddles beginning to form on the floor. It took a couple minutes before the wells ran dry, and just as long to dry up the wet floor. Izuku and Inko both left with an embarrassed wave, and finalized the time of the appointment with the receptionist. Once they were back in the car, exhaustion hit Izuku like a truck, knocking him out the moment they were on the road. Izuku woke up several hours later, the sun already high in the sky instead of the barely present early morning light he had gone to sleep seeing. He stretched in his bed, and thanked whatever deities that were looking out for him that there wasn't another portion of a gun sticking out of him. Now having a healthy amount of sleep, his energy has returned to him, and so has his appetite. He made his way out of his room and towards the kitchen, where he was surprised to see his mom already making a large amount of katsudon. "Oh, perfect! I was about to go wake you up for a late breakfast. Dr. Haruai called and said that you would likely be very hungry when you woke up. He said something about protein and mineral depletion in your blood, but also said a hearty meal with lots of protein was an easy solution." "Wow! Well, thank you very much, Mom." The doctor was definitely right. Izuku was then interrupted by the loudest grumble either Midoriya had heard a stomach make. Immediately grabbing a bowl with rice already in it, Inko put several pieces of the katsu in and handed it to Izuku, who took it and sat down to devour the meal. 20 minutes later, Izuku now felt stuffed, having eaten roughly 4 times his normal helping or food, much to the wide-eyed surprise of his mother. "I love that you enjoyed my cooking, dear, but that isn't normal." Izuku sat up in his seat, eyeing the now empty bowl. "Definitely not normal, but I must say that if what the doctor said about my blood is true, then it should be expected." The two cleaned up in content silence, with Izuku helping wash dishes while Inko went about cleaning the countertops. When they were done, they both proceeded to get cleaned up and dressed for the day, as it was already 11 in the morning and the appointment was at 12:30. Entering Mizutofu General once again, Izuku was practically vibrating with energy, scratch that, literally vibrating. This time around, the waiting area was somewhat more full, and there was a different receptionist at the desk. Consulting with the receptionist, they were sent towards the research wing of the hospital that deals with Quirk studies. After a few minutes of maneuvering around the large hospital, as well as asking for directions a few times, they made it to a large room full of different equipment ranging from medical devices to gym weights and even a shooting range. Well, I do suppose gun-type quirks are still fairly common in the grand scheme of things," Izuku mumbled, analyzing the room. "Why, yes, they are, Mr. Midoriya," Dr. Haruai replied, startling both of the Midoriyas as he walked in the room. "The hospital has a few rooms like this to study the vast variety of quirks children are born with, both for their safety and for others." Their eyes glistening in awe, Izuku and Inko started going around the room, looking at the equipment whilst the doctor got some of the medical equipment running. Once they were all settled down, the two sat in chairs offered by the doctor as he stood next to a small television screen. "Well, Mr. Midoriya, now that the lab has done a thorough analysis on the 2 blood samples you provided, we now have a much better handle on the medical effects of your quirk on your body." He paused, pressing a button on a small remote, which pulled up 2 charts showing percentages of different chemicals and minerals. As you can see, the right chart, which comes from the sample taken post-activation of your quirk, possesses marginally smaller amounts of basic minerals, but far lower amounts of metals and sugars, the doctor explained. "The general hypothesis I have is that the creation of the gun itself is what uses up your mineral and metal content within your body, while the sugar depletion is likely because of the subconscious muscle movement that your body performs to eject the object from your body as it is made, which is a common occurrence with similar quirks." Izuku was already processing all of this information, coming up with theories and ideas for potential ways to improve upon his quirk. "However, young man, we are here today to perform some practical tests to see how you can affect the end result of your quirk, if you would be so willing." Izuku was shaken out of his thoughts, and replied with a quick, "Of course," in response to the doctor. "Will he be safe doing these tests, doctor?" Inko interjected. "I can't help but worry some about the side effects of his quirk." The doctor gave a small smile and stated, "Ms. Midoriya, I will take the utmost care to ensure that your son is perfectly fine once the tests are finished." Inko pondered for a moment and gave a small nod. From there, Izuku once again had some blood drawn, and all his measurements taken as standard procedure called for. The doctor then set up a few electrodes on Izuku's head to monitor his brain waves while the tests were done. He then went to sit next to the doctor at the computer, as he held out various small objects and trinkets for Izuku to attempt to create. With none of the objects seemingly compatible, the doctor then started taking out some tools and electronics to see if it required more complex items to work. Once again, no luck. The doctor contemplated for a moment, then opened a file on the computer which had a 3D rendered image of various small weapons varying from melee to ranged weapons such as guns and slingshots. Going for few minutes an item, none of the melee weapons seemed to register with his quirk. The first success came as a surprise, as Izuku deeply imagined the simple slingshot portrayed. He could picture every groove in the wood and the texture of the elastic drawstrings, and soon he felt a small, almost tingling feeling in his arm. Opening his eyes, he caught the moment the wooden slingshot and a few perfectly spherical stones fell out of his forearm, making his eyes widen in surprise. From then on, every ranged weapon seemed to work with his quirk, with the more complex weapons like guns taking a minute or two longer than the other simpler weapons. He even discovered that, if he thought about it, he could control which part of his body the objects ejected from. The doctor then let Izuku have a break, giving him a few extremely high-density protein bars that were designed for quirks like his that used up the body's nutrients. The doctor called the two Midoriyas back to the seats they started the appointment in to go over what they had discovered in summary. Clearing his throat and turning on the screen to show various images of Izuku's brain and charts of his body's nutritional levels once again, the doctor began. It is now finalized that Izuku Midoriya is in possession of an emitter-type creation quirk that exclusively creates any ranged weaponry the user imagines. As you can see with the images of Mr. Midoriya's brain, there is only minor activity when he was imagining non-ranged weapons, whereas his brain enters an incredibly active state, indicating his quirk activation when he was tasked to create a ranged weapon. The doctor paused, letting Izuku and Inko look at the two vastly different images of Izuku's brain. On the left, it had some sparse lit-up areas as was expected, but on the right, it looked like his brain was some weird festival light show. Also, as far as I can see, the effects made by the quirk can be easily negated by eating meals high in protein and metal content, as well as some sugary drinks thrown in to help with low blood sugar. It would also seem that more detailed items take a longer amount of time, with a general time of 1.5 minutes need to create anything of pistol size and complexity. The doctor paused again, this time a small grin forming on his face. All there is left to do, young man, is give your quirk a name, as it is the first of his kind. Izuku's thought process froze. A name, the first impression anyone would get from his quirk. In a way, it could even partially define who you are. His brain restarted when his mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a silent smile reassuring him that she supports his decision no matter what. The quirk. No, my quirk. My quirk's name is Gunsmith. Chapter 3, The Cowboy Cometh. Summary: a necessary confrontation and the meeting of a lifetime. Gunsmith, that is quite fitting in my opinion, Dr. Haruai mused, though it must go for the record that you can't create anything in public without a quirk use license, and even then I doubt the quirk registry would allow you to even have any weapons on your person without proper training. Izuku absorbed the doctor's words like a sponge. Not being able to use his quirk at all until he took a test for a hero course simply wouldn't do. Even he knew that he would need training to even be allowed to use the weapons he creates. Well, perhaps I could pull some strings, all things considered. It shouldn't be too hard for me to get you mandated quirk training, in this case what would amount to shooting courses, since you have essentially been misdiagnosed by the medical system up until now. Both Midoriya's heads shot towards the doctor, shocked at what he was saying. You would do something like that for my son, doctor? Inko asked, small tears welling up in her eyes. Of course, it would be against my better nature for me to not attempt to make it up to you on behalf of the medical community. The doctor replied with a smile. And either way, I am intrigued to see what this young man is capable of achieving. I can tell a hero enthusiast when I see one. Once again, the Midoriyas started crying, but out of respect to the patient doctor, they kept it to a short 30 seconds before they managed to gather their composure once again. Inko sniffled one more time, wiping her face down with another tissue. I can't thank you enough, doctor. This means so much to us. Inko stated, looking up towards Izuku. Thank you for helping my son take another step towards his dream. Izuku meekly nodded, holding back another wave of emotions crashing against the proverbial dam. Well, if that's all in order, Then I'll be sure to send you a list of courses that will be covered by the prefecture sometime later tomorrow. The doctor began, standing up from his chair. In other words, I have to get this submitted to the registry and attend to some other appointments I have today. In response, both Izuku and Inko stood up along with the man and gave him handshakes and many thank yous before he left the room. Once again in silent, content contemplation, the Midoriya family made their way home after the several-hour appointment. Izuku and Inko had the leftover katsudon and prepared for the next day. Oh crap, Katsuki has no clue I have a quirk? Izuku mumbled in shock, nearly dropping one of his infamous hero notebooks. This is going to be a nightmare to explain without setting him off. With a sigh, Izuku decided this was a tomorrow problem and preparing to go to sleep. Inko was sitting at the computer as Izuku finished getting ready for school. Currently, she was looking at the list of approved training courses that her son could take. The majority of them were great options, ranging from ex-military instructors to retired policemen. However, she paused near the bottom of the list at one specific course. A playful smile formed on her face as she replied to Dr. Haruai about which course she approved of. There wasn't any doubt in her mind that this would be the one Izuku would have chosen in a heartbeat, so why not keep it a surprise? She had finished sending the email right as she heard, "Mom, I'm heading out," come from the front of the home. She quickly made her way to give her baby boy a quick hug before sending him out so as to not be late. Izuku was a bundle of nerves as he arrived at Aldera High School. Even though he was only a couple weeks into his first year, Katsuki had already made his life a living hell. Being quirkless wasn't all that rare. 2 in 10 people lacked a quirk, but the majority of those who were quirkless are of the older generation. Only 1 in 30 teens his age lacked a quirk, however. He could proudly say he no longer is the minority in that demographic. The downside is that only a total of roughly 3 people in the world knew that at this point. Thinking, he realized that the only way to end this here and now would be to show the class that he was no longer quirkless. He began walking to class faster, winding through the still populated hallways of the school until he made it to his class with roughly 10 minutes till the bell. Luckily, Katsuki and his goons weren't in class yet, so he still had a few minutes of peace before the big reveal. As usual, he got the occasional look of disgust or contempt from the class, and as usual, he generally couldn't be brought to give a damn. The look stopped bothering him a long time ago. The only thing that could still get under his skin was the occasional comment or physical confrontation in Katsuki's case. He looked up right as the explosive devil himself stomped into the room, sending a sharp glare at Izuku before he sat at his front desk. Not a minute later, and the bell rang, the class now filled with the remaining students. "Good morning, class," the teacher said as he came in, receiving a unison response. Sensei, I'd like to say something to the class before we begin," Izuku said, his voice slightly shaky. Looking to him, the man gave a sigh and a quiet, "Make it quick," as he pulled some papers out of his desk. Murmurs spread across the class as Izuku walked to the front, with several people giving him deadly glares, silently asking why the mouse dared to speak in front of the hawks. Taking a deep breath, Izuku stated, "Well, to put it simply, I am no longer quirkless." "Bullshit," Katsuki practically roared, standing from his desk. "You're just saying that thinking we'll believe you have some stupid fucking quirk that doesn't even exist." The class, now in a furious uproar, took a moment for the teacher to get to shut up. "Midoriya, now isn't the time for jokes. Go sit down." The teacher seethed, giving Izuku menacing look for getting the class riled up. "Sir, I'm not joking, and I'll prove it right now," Izuku replied calmly, rolling up his right sleeve to expose his forearm. Izuku closed his eyes, imagining the simple wooden slingshot that he made at the hospital. The class went dead silent as they watched a piece of wood, followed by the rubber cords and the leather sling itself get pushed out of Izuku's arm, with a dull light emanating from where it was connected to his skin. Izuku's eyes finally opened as he grabbed the object with his other hand as it finally separated from his arm. Izuku was deadly calm as he set the slingshot in the garbage, turned, and walked back to his seat in the back of the class. "Okay. Thank you, Midoriya, for the demonstration, though no using that in school, please," the teacher said shakily, processing that the boy was not in fact lying. "Class, please begin opening the textbook to page 57. Izuku could tell a storm was brewing as news of his quirk spread around the school like wildfire. The resident quirkless freak was no longer at the bottom of the food chain. The day passed in an uncomfortable silence for every class, and even lunch. Nobody even spoke to Izuku, but they were still looking at him. The stares were different this time, some curious, others doubtful. But a few had something Izuku hadn't expected: fear. There were those who spotted him, and from their body language almost seemed to tense up, expecting some sort of confrontation Izuku had no intention of giving. As he left the school to head home, he heard the door to the school slam open, getting his attention. At the top of the several steps to the door, Katsuki was looking down toward him, his glare unflinching, but there was something different this time. "Your quirk, what's its name?" he practically ordered, not making any movement. Izuku stared back, determination building in his gut. "My quirk is called Gunsmith," incredibly self-explanatory. They stared at each other. Tension as thick as smog filled the air. Katsuki huffed before stalking down the steps and past Izuku, who was now bewildered at the display of self-restraint. He paused for a moment, turning his head slightly at Izuku. "Remember, nerd, I will always be better than you." Another pause. "And your stupid fucking quirk?" Izuku was practically frozen as Katsuki walked away, the fog on his brain going with him. He turned around and watched his tormentor walk out of sight as he processed what just happened. "What the fuck?" he whispered, unable to comprehend that blasty boom boom man himself just said a few moderately calm words before leaving of his own accord. Just as she had started making dinner, she heard the front door open, signaling that Izuku was home. She poked her head out into the hallway with a smile and saw that Izuku was clearly in the midst of one of his signature thinking sessions. His eyebrows were scrunched together, his hand touching his chin as he mumbled too quietly for her to hear. "Welcome home, dear. I just got dinner started," she said, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Oh, thanks, Mom. I'll get all cleaned up," he replied, returning a smile of his own before making his way to his room. She returned to the stove, watching the food cook with her keen eyes. A few minutes later, Izuku came into the living room and flopped onto the couch, now in more comfortable clothes than his school uniform. "Smells like pork, Mom. What are you making?" he asked, turning on the television to the news. "Right on the dot, Izuku. Pork chops will be ready in a couple of minutes." For the next few minutes, the only noise was the droning of the newscaster and the sizzling of meat in the kitchen. And there was something else in that silence that Inko couldn't quite place. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time, not since before Izuku was falsely diagnosed quirkless. Not wanting to look the gift horse in the mouth either way, she set the table and called Izuku over. As they were cleaning up the dishes, Inko cleared her throat, getting her son's attention. "Izuku, remember what the doctor said about getting you signed up for a firearm training course?" she asked, her son's eyes flashing with remembrance. "Yeah, did you get a list from him? I was itching to look it over," he exclaimed, practically bouncing in the way she had only seen him do when there was a hero fighting on the news. "Well, sweetie, you have already been signed up for one I just knew you would want, and the first session is tomorrow," she replied happily, not wanting to give too much away. "Wow, I'll have to get some rest then," he stated, turning around to finish the dishes with renewed fervor, once again entering a state of deep thinking. Inko just sighed with a smile as she wiped down the counters. The moment Izuku was done, he left into his room saying something about finishing homework with a small wave. Inko just smiled and went into the office to take care of a few emails from work. After about an hour of working, she left to get ready for bed. Deciding to check on Izuku one more time, she smiled as she saw him sleeping, with one of his hero notebooks open showing the Pro Hero gunhead in it. "Looking for some inspiration, HM? I hope you like my surprise," Inko whispered to herself, heading to bed and shutting off the lights. Izuku has been excited the whole day, and nothing has attempted to stop him, though he has done his best to hide it. The school seemed to have settled down some, and for the most part, now seems to be ignoring Izuku's existence. Most of the stares have gone away, though a few still linger their eyes on him longer than the average person. Izuku still was ruminating over what Katsuki had said to him, with the occasional glance sent towards the explosive boy. Katsuki seemed more frustrated than usual, but also less aggressive, like he was contemplating something vicariously every moment of the day. As he was leaving school to meet his mom back home, not a single one of Katsuki's gang were in sight, much less the leader himself. As he made his way home, he went over exactly why his mother would want to keep who the class was taught by a surprise. Without a doubt, it was being taught by a pro-hero. There was no other option as to who his mother would hide from him. He had spent quite a while last night going over every pro-hero he knew that had a gun-type quirk or used guns as support gear for their quirk. He stopped that train of thought, however, as he bounded up the stairs and into their apartment, immediately getting changed. He came out and saw his mother was already waiting by the front door with a massive grin on her face. "Ready to get going?" she asked, putting on her shoes with izuku. "I'm all set," he replied excitedly, following his mom to the car. They drove with only the smooth jazz from the radio and the noises of the road filling their ears, perfectly content to sit in an upbeat silence. Izuku was excited, and was only more so that his mother seemed to be in the same mood as him. Making their way across Mizudafu, the drive was only about 20 minutes long before they arrived at their destination. The building itself looked like it had 3 floors, and seemed rather large in terms of floor space. Looking towards the front door, Izuku's eyes widened at the large sign above the double sliding doors. High Noon Weapons. Inko's smile didn't falter even as her son let out a high-pitched squeal in the seat next to her, literally bouncing in his seat. "Mom, this place is the weapons store and training center run by the quick-draw hero. Snipe," he exclaimed. "You really knew exactly what I wanted. Thank you so much, Mom." She just gave a hearty laugh, purely elated at the sight of the brightest smile her son had ever given her. "I'm your mother, of course I know. Just promise me you'll do your best to become the #1 hero. Okay?" Izuku listened to his mother intently, and could only nod as he held back tears, for the sake of being on time for his first session. Parking the car in one of the available spaces, the 2 Midoriyas got out of the car and went into the large building. The first floor was filled with chest-high shelves of accessories both for people and their firearms, sale markers every few aisles offering decent prices for all the items. There was a section for gun cases, safes, and even for tactical clothing. His eyes were eating everything up as he followed his mom to one of the large glass counters on the edge of the room, which was filled with a large assortment of pistols and knives, as well as some attachments and cleaning kits. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" a woman asked, coming from further down the counter to meet them. Looking at her, she had lightly tanned skin and gray hair, yet didn't look a day above 20. Her face was slightly rounded with a pair of glasses over her silver eyes. "Well, we are looking for where the firearms training is. My son here is going to be starting today." The woman looked slightly surprised, looking at Izuku for a moment. He could understand the skepticism. He was a fairly skinny 15-year-old high school student. Her surprise quickly disappeared, however, with a nod and gestured to follow her with a small smile. She led the two to the far right corner of the room where there were stairs and an elevator. They took the elevator and headed down into the basement. When the doors opened, they were greeted with a plain room that had a calendar and posters showing local gun-related events, as well as chairs and a water fountain. "Go ahead and wait in here for the instructor. Make yourself at home. He should be here any minute now," she said with a bow, before turning back around and heading up to the first floor. And so they waited. Izuku looked around at the different posters on the wall while Inko looked at one of the female-oriented tactical magazines. They were there for less than 50 seconds, however, when the elevator dinged again, and Izuku came dangerously close to a heart attack. Out of the elevator came a man with a Western cowboy hat, gas mask, and flowing red cape. "Well, hello there. I'm the pro-hero Snipe, your instructor kid," he said, tipping his hat towards Izuku. "And you must be his lovely mother. Nice to make your acquaintance." Since Izuku was completely frozen in shock, Inko decided to speak up. "Nice to meet you as well, sir. I'm Inko Midoriya, and this is my son Izuku Midoriya." She stood up and shook the man's hand. How gentle, Inko thought, as the man gave her a respectful shake before turning towards Izuku with his hand out. Izuku forced himself to shake the man's hand, and the firm, yet gentle grip he had made him relax to a point of being able to think at normal speed. This wasn't the time to be a hero nerd, now was the time to focus. "Nice to meet you, sir," Izuku stated with a slight crack in his voice, which brought out a chuckle from the pro hero. Nice to meet you too, kid, he said, taking a step back. Well, as I said a moment ago, I'll be the instructor for your son, Mrs. Midoriya. From what the schedule says, the sessions will be every weekday for 2 hours a day. During these sessions, I'll be teaching him proper gun safety, how to maintain firearms, proper gun law, and of course, how to shoot different kinds of guns. Izuku and Inko both listened intently, with Izuku internally cheering that he gets to be taught by a pro hero for 10 hours a week. Though, one question immediately popped into Izuku's mind. Will it be just me during these sessions? Both of the Midoriyas looked at Snipe as he put a finger up to his chin and replied, Well, I'd hope you'd let me tag along since you need supervision, if you don't mind? He asked, with both of the Midoriyas contemplating for a moment before trying very hard to not laugh. Snipe laughed along with them, the remaining tension or nervousness gone completely from all parties. Once everyone settled down, he looked at Inko and said, Sadly, you will have to come get him from either here or upstairs when the sessions are over, as I can't technically bring you into the range. Inko smiled, seeing as even though this was a professional rule, that the man was legitimately apologetic. It's quite all right, Mr. Snipe. I'm sure I can occupy myself just fine, she said, turning to look at Izuku. Stay on your best behavior, dear. I'll be upstairs when you are all done. Bye, Mom, Izuku said, waving his mother goodbye along with the pro hero in front of him. Deciding now was assuredly not the time to be gushing over the pro hero in front of him. Izuku took a deep breath to calm himself down. Snipe took a good look at the kid now that his, admittedly sweet mother was gone. He looked to be healthy, but with very little muscle mass, likely the result of a high metabolism. From what he was given on the boy, his newly discovered quirk allowed him to create projectile weapons from his body's nutrients. Quite amazing, and potentially dangerous as any good quirk is. I'm going to cut straight to the chase, kid. I'm here to make sure you can use your quirk to its fullest extent in a way that ensures the safety of yourself and others around you, he stated, quickly grabbing the attention of the freckled boy. Though for now, we can start by going over basic gun law and firearm safety procedures. Does that sound good? Izuku took in his words for another moment, before replying, Yes, sensei, enthusiastically, his face now looking fiercely determined. So, Snipe led his student into the door on the left of the room, which opened into a small classroom filled with about 20 desks and some work tables on the edges of the room. We will begin every session in here, kid, and the bathrooms, if you need them, are through the other door in the waiting room, he stated, taking a spot standing at the front of the room while Izuku sat in the desk directly in front of him. Snipe began writing some of Japan's gun laws on the board, when he heard a furious scratching noise behind him. As he finished, he turned around and saw that Izuku had pulled a notebook and pencil from God knows where, and had already written down every single law on the board, as well as what appears to be how they apply to his quirk. Well, I'll be damned, kid. Seems like we will be able to finish the boring stuff quick, Snipe remarked, causing Izuku to pause and look up at him. Nobody told me you were a fast learner. Let's pick up the pace a bit then, try to keep up. And so, for the next half hour, Snipe talked Izuku through almost every law that could apply to weapons in Japan, as well as how they apply to him and to others. He was genuinely impressed as the kid was taking detailed notes almost as fast as he could speak. By the time he reached the end of the important laws, the kid had filled almost half the notebook, 2/3 of which was Izuku's own commentary to what Snipe was teaching. I think I have a good understanding, sensei, though it wouldn't hurt for me to go over all of this a few more times for safe measure. He jumped when Snipe just laughed and gave Izuku a light pat on the head. You know, kid, I've never had anyone say that they wanted to go over national law as readily as you have, he said, smiling beneath his mask. How about this? I'll hold these beginning of session lessons for the rest of this week, and if you pass a quiz next Monday, we can only have refreshers on the law once a week. Izuku pondered for a moment, before giving a curt nod in response. Snipe was beginning to really like this kid, but now it was time to see what he was really made of. Beginning to head for the second door, opposite to the one the two entered from, Snipe stated, All right, that's enough politics for today. Let's see how well you do with your first time handling a firearm. Yes, Snipe-sensei, Izuku replied, quickly putting his notebook away in a small backpack he had and jogged after Snipe, who was already headed through the door, Beyond the classroom was an enormous shooting range to the right, with a large wall of locked-away weapons opposite to it. "Welcome to the range, kid. Go ahead and stand at one of the booths to the right there and put on one of the headsets that should be there," Snipe said, walking over to one of the gun lockers. Izuku obeyed and went to the one right next to where he was standing. The booth itself was fairly spacious, with enough room to fit 3 of him comfortably. On the wall were several protective headsets of different sizes. Izuku experimented until he found one that fit him best. Turning around, he saw Snipe walking over with a small black handgun and a few magazines on a cart. Snipe walked up to the booth and held up the handgun, stating, "This here is a Smith & Wesson brand M&P shield. Its fairly small bit gives a decent amount of recoil as it fires .45 ACP rounds." Izuku ate it all up, closely examining the gun Snipe was holding. "Now, remember the rules I went over in the classroom. Check to see if it's loaded the moment it is handed to you. Ensure the safety is on. Keep your finger off the trigger, and keep it pointed towards the ground or the target." Izuku repeated all of the steps under his breath as he carefully went over the pistol now in his hands. Snipe watched him carefully, noting how the boy completed the basic steps with almost robotic efficiency despite this likely being his first time handling a gun. "Alright kiddo, now I want you to take a magazine here and load the gun, and take aim at the target downrange currently, which is about 20 feet away," Snipe said as he went to stand on Izuku's left. He watched as the boy spread his legs to be shoulder-width apart, with his left leg slightly in front of his right. He then brought up the gun in front of him with his arms ever so slightly bent, leaning his torso forward and bending his knees. Honestly, this was a picture-perfect stance, just like the one Snipe showed pictures of in the classroom. "Nice placement of the feet, though lean back a tad, you don't want to be hunched over," Snipe commented, with Izuku immediately making corrections to his positioning. "Good. Now take steady breaths and empty the magazine, with 2 seconds in between each shot." Izuku focused his vision and kept both his eyes open like Snipe said, as one eye closed should only be done when aiming down a scope. He let the shots out slowly, the first hitting just beneath the left shoulder of the body on the target, and the last 5 all hitting within the red center mass. Snipe gave a low whistle as the kid immediately corrected and adjusted to the firearm after the first shot, keeping the majority of his bullet spread compact and accurate. Snipe pressed a button on the wall next to him, and the paper target came forward to where the 2 were standing. He gave a low whistle as he examined the boy's handiwork. "You sure you have never shot a gun before, kid? This here is amazing for a beginner, even if that is a more tame gun you have there." Izuku blushed at the praise given by the pro hero, as he replied with a shaky, "No, I haven't, sensei." He shrunk slightly under the scrutinizing gaze given by Snipe through his mask, but did not falter. Snipe sighed and ruffled Izuku's hair. "You're just full of surprises, kid. It's just amazing how talented you are." At that point, Izuku began letting a few small tears slip down his face, as he couldn't handle the genuine praise a pro hero was giving him. Thank you so much, sensei. It means a lot to me." Izuku sniffled, setting the gun down before rubbing his face. Snipe began to fidget uncomfortably, as he didn't exactly know what to do in this situation. Most people didn't cry when complimented, which made Snipe wonder in the back of his head just what this kid's life was like to make him so happy to receive praise. So he carefully gave the boy a hug, which caused Izuku to jump a bit, but lean in acceptingly. Snipe just couldn't shake the feeling that this kid was really growing on him. Plus, it couldn't hurt that his mother was cute. Shaking his thoughts away, Snipe separated from a now embarrassed Izuku before suggesting, "How about you shoot on this for a little while I get a few more smaller handguns out for you to get a feel of?" He smiled under his mask as Izuku's determination returned to his face, the emotions that spilled from the boy already a distant memory. "Yes, sensei." Chapter 4. Determination. Hank Saikaku considered himself quite the fast learner, and that skill had only evolved when he became the pro hero Snipe. He had to be able to make millisecond decisions on how to alter projectile trajectories when fighting villains, lest any of his bullets hit a major artery or worse, kill the target right then and there. Being a hero whose quirk revolved around firearms of any kind is a very dangerous endeavor. More than once he had seen pro heroes like him have their licenses revoked, or even face prison time because of a slip-up against a villain. Luckily for him, his quirk, trajectory, allows him to alter the directions his bullets fly to an extreme degree. This allows him to account for variables out of his control, like a sudden movement from a villain, or even having his own body jostled, destabilizing his aim. In a way, his quirk is both an enhancement to his fighting ability and a handicap that prevents him from making fatal errors. So he was fairly surprised yesterday when he received a notice from the government's Quirk Registry Division that a teenager was entered into his training program. Taking a look at his background, it would appear that the young man was receiving training to ensure that he would be able to have complete control over his quirk, Gunsmith. Hank skipped a few pages on the boy's physical health to check just what his quirk was, so he could have an idea of what extra training he would have to take into account. To his surprise, his quirk wasn't something related to the use of guns, but the creation of them. Well, any projectile-based weapon to be specific. Normally, this specific category of quirk wouldn't qualify a need for firearms training. Someone must have pulled some strings for the kid, or there was some other factor being taken into account. Either way, Hank went back to checking over the lesson plans he was altering for the upcoming year for UA. "I think we've found ourselves a little problem here, kid," Hank stated, watching Izuku shakily set down the fourth pistol variant they were trying. When Izuku had finished firing a few magazines of AM 1911 model pistol, they decided to switch to a fourth, slightly more heavy-duty Colt revolver. It was then Hank had noticed the slight shaking in Izuku's arms, and that became far more apparent after he fired a few shots at the target downrange. The kid's stance had become less steady, and the shaking in his arms made his firing spread go wider and wider, until it wasn't hitting the target outright. It seems that he just wasn't physically strong enough to be handling that much recoil. "I'm sorry, Snipe-sensei, but I don't think I can continue shooting for now," Izuku stated meekly, rubbing his forearms. Hank gave a little laugh and patted Izuku's back lightly, making the boy jump a tad. "It's all right, kiddo. Why don't we head back to the classroom and take a breather?" Izuku replied with a curt nod and began walking back to the room they began in. Hank rolled the cart of weapons he had prepared back to the lockers in the back and made sure they were safely stored before heading to the classroom himself. Thinking back on the last hour they had been together, he realized that whatever his expectations of Izuku had been before they met were completely shattered. The kid was a good listener and picked up on information quickly. Some of the students at UA would definitely do good to be more like him. What caught Hank the most off guard, however, was the genuine kindness and respect Izuku gave him. Most teenagers are quite strong-willed and generally a bit untamed in his opinion. His new student was a complete outlier, and while Hank believed that it had partly to do with his sweet mother, he sensed a connection here to the way he responded to the praise Hank gave him when he first started shooting. Coming back to the present, he entered the classroom and saw Izuku writing once again on a notebook that seemed to appear out of thin air. "All right, Izuku. What do you think needs to be improved upon after that first session of target practice?" Hank asked, pulling up a chair to be in front of the desk Izuku was sitting in. "Well, the main problem I have is that I need to become stronger so I can handle shooting for a longer period of time, and so that I can handle more recoil," he stated, setting down his pencil and looking up towards Hank. "Right on the mark, kid. What you clearly need is more physical conditioning. As from what I can see, your mind is well taken care of," Hank began, watching Izuku quickly begin transcribing his small lecture. "You have a solid grasp on proper technique and methods to shooting, but from what I can see, you don't have very much muscle on that frame of yours. It looks like we are going to have to set you up with a workout regimen for when you aren't training with me." Izuku looked up from his writing, his head slightly tilted in thought. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, sensei," he replied, a large grin forming on his face. "That's good to hear," Hank stated, a grin of his own forming under his mask. "I should have that all ready for you tomorrow. Since it's probably best that we don't shoot anymore for today, let's talk about this quirk of yours." At that, Izuku appeared to be immediately reinvigorated, his posture straightening in his seat. "Well, assuming you don't know, my quirk is called Gunsmith," he began, "and it allows me to create any projectile weapon along with ammunition for said weapon, using up protein and nutrients within my body." Hank listened intently as Izuku described the physical toll his quirk has. For what little time he has had it, Izuku seems to have quite a good understanding of at least the major functions of the quirk. Hank thought, following along as Izuku finished up with the details. "Well, kid, How about we think of some ways to improve on that quirk of yours? That is, of course, if you are planning on being a hero. Hank stated, leaning forward towards Izuku. Oh, of course. That is the main reason I wanted to do all of this. Izuku replied, his body going rigidly straight. Hank stared down the boy for a moment longer, his slight smile hidden behind his mask. Well, alrighty then, he said, leaning back into a more relaxed posture. Let's get some ideas flowing. After about half an hour of shooting ideas back and forth, pun intended, the two had written down a small list of plausible theories and experiments to test unknown aspects of gunsmith. I think that's a solid set of ideas we have down, and all that leaves us with is 30 more minutes to work with, Snipe mused, standing up from his chair to stretch his shoulders. Izuku jotted down a few more ideas into the notebook before setting it down and looking it over. Well, we will likely only have time to do 2 of these smaller experiments, Sensei, Izuku stated, pointing at 2 of the ideas near the middle of the list. Snipe walked next to Izuku and pondered what Izuku was suggesting. Seems like a sound plan, kiddo, he replied, patting Izuku on the shoulder. I'll go and get the materials we need. Be back in a jiffy. With that, the pro hero walked out of the room towards the shooting range, while Izuku brought his things towards one of the workbenches on the edges of the room. The 2 items on the list were simple yet quite important in their own ways. The first was whether or not gunsmith allows for the creation of ammo separate from a weapon. This could allow Izuku to stock up on individual portions of ammunition without wasting nutrients and stamina on making a completely new weapon. The second experiment was similar in that it would test if gunsmith can make individual attachments to ranged weapons, which offers similar boons if it is successful. Snipe came back into the room and immediately made his way to the station Izuku was sitting at. He then set a few different calibers of bullets, as well as a basic iron sight for a rifle and a flashlight attachment for a pistol. Okay, kid, these should do for this quick experiment, Snipe said, taking a seat next to him. Izuku replied with a nod and reached to pick up and examine the 9mm rounds offered. He closed his eyes and thought of the shape of the bullet, the grooves resulting from the various connected parts as well as the gunpowder that lay within. He then felt almost a light tingling in his body, which he forced to move to the open palm of his free hand. Izuku opened his eyes and held on to the feeling of gunsmith activating, watching in awe as several more identical bullets began gathering in his palm, forming at an extremely fast rate. That was only about 3 seconds before the bullets started coming out, Snipe pondered, watching the display of Izuku's quirk with intense curiosity. And it seems the individual bullets form at roughly a rate of 2 per second. Izuku held the activation for a few more seconds, and then released once his hand was completely filled with bullets. Sensei, it worked, Izuku exclaimed, completely elated that a new discovery had been made. Sure did, Snipe replied, giving the boy a thumbs up. Now how about you try making a magazine to hold those bullets in? Setting the bullets down onto the work table, Izuku once again went into thought, getting the shape and structure of the magazine he needed for the ammunition he needed. He tried imagining the structure to be empty, so that he could insert the pre-made bullets, but no matter how hard he tried, he just didn't feel the familiar connection of his quirk. Deciding that an empty magazine wouldn't work, he then imagined the bullets themselves being created along with the magazine, so that the ammunition was ready to be loaded and fired. Sure enough, the connection appeared, and Izuku went through the same process, opening his eyes to watch as a fully loaded 9mm magazine slid out of his palm in just about 3 seconds. Good to know, Izuku mumbled, taking notes once again in the notebook on the table. Let me guess, you can only make loaded magazines? Snipe asked, having watched Izuku go through a quiet storm of mumbling. Yup, Izuku replied, once again cheerful. I think I can only make the magazine since the ammunition is housed within it as a single unit. Sounds like a solid explanation, Snipe replied. Now try those 2 accessories while I clean up the table. Izuku moved the stray bullets towards the pro hero, and then proceeded to try and create the iron sights on the table. He let his mind flow once again, but after a failure to connect with that, he found the same result with the flashlight attachment. Dang, looks like those don't work on their own, Izuku huffed, a little disappointed that both experiments couldn't work. Don't stress it, kiddo, that's just how quirks are sometimes, Snipe stated, once again ruffling Izuku's messy green tufts of hair. We can run some more of these experiments later, as our time is just about up. Sounds great, sensei. Inko was having quite a bit of fun, learning about the ins and outs of the store from the lady her and Izuku had encountered when they first entered the store. The two had become fast friends, as Inko stuck around the store instead of leaving, just for today of course, since it was Izuku's first day. Inko had come to find out that her name was Tsuruhi Saikaku, or Sarah, as she preferred to be called by friends. As a matter of fact, she was the sister of the hero Snipe, and ran the retail end of the business while her brother dealt with the other facets like training and maintenance, though they still had plenty of employees to loosen the burden. After all, from what Sarah had told Inko, her brother was quite busy between the business, hero work, and a teaching job at UA. Well, Inko, I believe your son and Han should be done any time now, Sarah began, taking another sip of her black coffee. Just know that you can shoot me a text whenever. I'm not usually super busy around here. I would quite like that. I haven't really had anyone to talk to recently besides one of my oldest childhood friends, Inko replied, before finishing her own incredibly sweetened coffee. The darker-skinned woman gave a bright smile and proceeded to take their 2 cups and throw them into the trash can of the break room they were currently occupying. I'm going to have to get back to the front, making sure business is running smoothly and all. I'd best go wait for Izuku as well, Inko replied, following Sarah out of the room. I sure hope he enjoyed himself, considering he is going to be coming here for a while. As the 2 women walked out of the room and into the main portion of the first floor, Inko's shoe caught on the edge of a clothing rack, and she began to stumble forward. Before she could hit the ground, however, a large pair of arms caught her in their embrace, steadying her back on her feet. You all right there, ma'am? The man asked. Looking up to see who caught her, she let out a slight eep, when it was none other than the pro hero teaching her son. I think I'm fine now, Mr. Snipe, Inko stated shakily, a light blush appearing from noticing how muscular the hero was, considering his hero costume had no sleeves. The hero quickly let go of her and rubbed the back of his head. That's good to hear, Mrs. Midoriya, the pro hero replied. Though you can just call me Han, since we will be seeing each other quite a bit. Oh, okay. Though your sister mentioned that your given name was Hank, Inko asked, the light blush on her features refusing to disappear. At that, the man gave a hearty laugh and replied, Hank is definitely my name, but it makes me feel like I'm an old man. I've always preferred Han like Tsuruhi over here prefers Sarah. I see, Inko stated, finally managing to regain her composure. Well, I hope my son here wasn't too much trouble for you, Han. At that specific comment, Izuku got slightly more rigid, almost tense as to what his new teacher would have to say. This young man, Han began, placing a gloved hand on Izuku's shoulder, is by far one of the best students I've had the pleasure of teaching, and it has only been 1 day. Izuku, Inko, and even Sarah looked quite surprised at that statement, with the 2 Midoriyas already beginning to tear up. Luckily, they managed to hold in the emotions that stemmed from such a meaningful compliment by the pro hero. "TT, thank you, sensei," Izuku managed to squeak out, his throat tight with happiness. The mother and son then proceed to bow deeply, attempting to show the gratitude they were feeling without speaking. Now it was Han's turn to be surprised, as he looked towards his sister for some help. Of course, Sarah just gave him a small grin and a shrug, leaving him to find his own words. "There's no need for that, you two. Y'all are some of the kindest people I've met," he stated, attempting to calm down the emotional duo. "I'll be seeing you two for a while now, so why don't you go get some rest? I'm sure Izuku here could use it after the work we did today." The Midoriyas stopped bowing at that point, looking at each other and seeming to find the pro hero's words to be true. "I guess I'll see you tomorrow, sensei," Izuku stated, while Inko gave a small hug to Sarah and a mumbled goodbye to Han. "Take care of yourselves, and shoot me a text sometime, Inko," Sarah said in a chipper tone, waving the two off. "Now, spill the beans on what happened between you and the kid," Sarah stated, her glasses shining with a glint for gossip. At that, Han gulped, the mask he was wearing doing little to hide the fear he had for his sister's cravings for juicy information. "I've got to take care of some paperwork for UA. You know, with the midterms coming and all," he exclaimed, before darting out the door as well to head home. I know where you live, Sarah yelled, making a small attempt to try and stop him from escaping. Also, midterms are months away, you liar. Izuku had been quiet the entire way home, and didn't speak but a few words to his mother before heading up to his room. Luckily, his mom was understanding in that sometimes he just preferred it to be quiet when he was deep in thought or just decompressing after a long day. Thinking back on the experience he had today, quite a lot had happened. Not only does Katsuki and the school now know about his quirk, but he had learned even more about its inner workings with a pro hero. Then, as if that wasn't enough, said hero legitimately complimented Izuku and put in effort to make him better prepared for a future as a hero. All of these thoughts and emotions were swarming in his head, even as he went to the dining table for dinner. Izuku dear, Inko interjected, snapping Izuku out of his inner turmoil. How was your session with Esenhun? I never actually heard about what you did with him downstairs. Izuku pondered for a moment, gathering himself back together as he took another bite of rice. Well, Mom, it all started with some lessons on Japanese gun laws. So, Izuku told his mother about absolutely everything, telling about every law he learned, weapon he fired, and piece of advice Snipe had given him. She listened intently, a permanent smile on her face, as she listened to her son energetically describe his session. Even as their food grew cold, completely forgotten by the two people at the table, they could care less compared to the lively conversation they were having. Then, at the end, we experimented with Gunsmith and found that I can create ammunition for different weapons separate from the weapons themselves. Though, I can't make any lone attachments or accessories. Izuku finished, taking a big gulp of his water to quench his dry throat. That is absolutely wonderful, dear, Inko stated, a happiness in her eyes and smile that Izuku hasn't remembered seeing in a very long time. Well, how about you go get to bed, since you have school in the morning, and I will take care of cleaning up. You look quite tired, sweetie. Izuku didn't object one bit, as his mother went about cleaning the dishes while Izuku went to get ready for tomorrow. After a much-needed shower and change of clothes, Izuku laid in his bed, the only light coming from the street lamps outside his window. Snipe-sensei has already done so much for me, Izuku thought, closing his eyes. Now I have to repay his promise to help me improve by working as hard as I can. I will master my quirk and make it into UA so I can be the greatest hero. Chapter 5. Smarter, faster, stronger. You know, Sensei, when you said training regimen, I wasn't expecting all of this? Izuku looked down at the literal folder the pro hero Snipe had just handed him, with heroic training guide written in large letters on the front. Well, kid, Snipe began, walking with Izuku into the shooting range. That packet which I labored over for several hours last night covers absolutely everything we will be doing for the duration of our sessions, as well as extra material for work you can do afterwards, including a large amount of recipes for the meal plan I made should you choose to use it, and a fairly summarized list of all of Japan's heroics, quirk use, and firearm laws. So much, Izuku exclaimed, setting the massive amount of materials down onto one of the back tables with the rest of his belongings. So, do you think you are up to it? Snipe asked him, turning to face Izuku with his hands on his hips. Yes, Sensei. So, as the days passed, the true beginning of Izuku's training began. He would start off the day with a set of morning stretches to work on his flexibility, before eating a large and healthy breakfast, courtesy of Inko. She did, however, ask Sarah about where Han had gotten these recipes, and she came to find out that he had spent several years in America, where his part-time hobby of cooking caused him to search out new types of cuisines to add to his repertoire. Then, after devouring the breakfasts, Izuku did several small sets of push-ups, sit-ups, and squats. He would then follow up by jogging to school every day. While school had become far more normalized for Izuku, he could tell that there was always the occasional stare he would get in the halls, and people were still reluctant to speak to him. Even Katsuki had practically stopped any and all forms of bullying. Not just to Izuku, but the other weaker students in the school. After school ended, Izuku was picked up by his mother and ferried to High Noon Weapons, where Snipe was always ready to get started. Inko herself would chat with Sarah in the main area of the store for a bit before heading out to get errands done while Izuku worked with the pro. Every day Izuku and Snipe would do a quick refresher on a couple sets of laws a day, including the differences in laws between prefectures, which Izuku always passed with flying colors. Following that, the duo moved into the range to continue working with different handguns of varying calibers. Every day Izuku could last a little bit longer on the range before his aim began degrading. After the range, they alternate every day between physical workouts and quirk training. The physical training pushed Izuku to his limits, leaving his whole body sore from the various workouts. Izuku came to find out that the second floor of the facility had a small gym for Snipe and the other employees to use on their off time. This gym is where Izuku found out that he was actually a complete string bean. He could consistently bench press the 75-pound bar on its own for several reps, but any more than that and he would tire out fast. Though on their first day in the gym, Snipe had Izuku take a picture against the wall for the record, along with writing down all of his baseline values when it came to weights and his other workouts. On the quirk training days, however, Izuku wore himself thin, making various firearms and ammunition as efficiently as possible. Through this process, Izuku found that there was a sweet spot where the speed and stamina use balanced out when creating new items. If he takes the process too fast, he ends up using more nutrients and tires out easier. On the other hand, taking his time to make objects didn't end up using as much stamina. Some other information he found out was that he could in fact make attachments to weapons, but they had to be made with the weapon at the same time. He also found out that he could make up to 3 copies of the same item at a time, which was very useful for the quick production of extra ammunition. Then they also found that the more Izuku produces a specific item, the faster it can be made later. By repeatedly producing weapons, he found that he could make just about any handgun in roughly 15 seconds. For one experiment, Snipe even called in a few favors and acquired blueprints for several handgun models. Much to Izuku's excitement, once he had looked over the blueprints themselves, his production time of those specific handguns decreased by over half, allowing him to generate them in about 6 seconds. It would seem that a deeper understanding of an item leads to faster production time. After these sessions, as expected, Izuku was completely wiped. The first few days he had to practically drag himself to the car, much to Snipe's amusement. Inko of course fretted over her baby boy, though Sarah did a stellar job of calming down her motherly instincts to a point where she isn't smothering her own son. Returning home, Inko once again makes Izuku a hearty meal to replenish lost nutrients because of both working out and gunsmith's drawbacks. At this point, however, Izuku once again has to go through another round of home workout before a long period of stretching the damaged muscles. All of this leaves him with approximately 2 hours of free time to do homework and his daily routine of watching the hero news. Over his career of teaching others, Han has never had such a dedicated student as Izuku Midoriya. He has taught law enforcement, military, and even other pro heroes the intricacies of firearms. Just a few years ago, he even was invited by a certain hyper-intelligent bear rodent to teach at UA. The only problem with UA students, however, is that they simply don't take firearms and the laws around them seriously enough. He's had to drop nearly 2/3 of his firearms elective students every year because he was stopping them from making a mistake they could never come back from. He refused to let their careers as heroes be ruined because they disregard the severity of punishment that a single slip-up can cause when it comes to gun usage. He must admit that while he has apprehensions about one of his fellow teachers' tendencies to expel students, Han can't help but relate to the sentiments behind them in his own way. With Izuku, however, he has never felt more assured about a student in his whole life. Over the many weeks, he has watched Izuku grow as both a person and a future hero. Yes, hero, there isn't a single doubt in his mind that Izuku will make it to his dream career. They had originally started with handguns, but over the first month, Izuku had reached a level of mastery that could be compared to specialized law enforcement and other pro heroes, if not better. So Han decided to change it up. Izuku sure was surprised when instead of a handgun, he was given a pump-action shotgun. As one of the most common firearm types in the world, it was only natural that this was the next step. Sure, he had a laugh when the boy nearly fell on his ass the first time, but immediately got to work improving him in every way possible. With a short series of pointers and warnings, the difference was astounding. Sure, he only lasted for about 20 minutes with shotguns, but it was his first time working with that style of weapon. He would improvise, adapt, and overcome. The second month went by, and Izuku had become familiarized with pump action, lever action, and semi-automatic shotguns, much the same as he had with the handguns. That wasn't to say that they didn't work on handguns anymore, as Han was sure to keep his skills honed with both categories of firearms. He also taught Izuku all about ammunition variants, and even got him to train quite a bit with non-lethal ammo types like beanbag and rubber shells. Izuku had also developed gunsmith even more, with him being able to consistently produce the shotguns he was being trained to use in an average time of 15 seconds, and that was without analyzing a blueprint of the weapon. With pistols, for example, any weapon he had studied thoroughly and made endless times at this point, he could produce in 2 seconds flat. Making ammunition wasn't even a time-consuming task any longer, with him being able to create magazines on call. Though it would still appear that he is locked to 3 copies of an item at a time when it comes to producing multiple of an item. All of this quirk development, however, is more than likely partially caused by the physical training Izuku has put in as well. It wasn't entirely obvious at a passing glance, but Izuku was making some serious improvement in his physique. All of his original weight limits and maximums when it came to working out have doubled or even tripled in some places. Speaking of improving, Han was surprised to see that over 2 months, Izuku had gone from 110 pounds into 125. That was a 15-pound gain, which was insane by any standard. Han did ask about whether he was taking steroids, which made the poor boy nearly fell apart in stress and rapid-fire assurances. In the end, the two had chalked it up to his quirk giving him a rapid metabolism, thus speeding up the process. An email to his doctor also affirmed that this was the most likely case. Currently, however, it was the first Monday of November, and the last month the pro hero had with Izuku. While in almost any case, Han wouldn't be too heartbroken to have his last sessions with the current batch of students, Izuku was a special case. Actually, he had ended up getting less sleep than normal last night because of this very situation. Over the years, he had seen other heroes take aspiring youth under their wings as a successor in their own way. It wasn't the most common, but it happened enough that it was known by just about every hero that these things can happen. As the pro hero snipe, Han has always been somewhat of a lone wolf, due to the nature of his fighting style. It was simple really, people generally had a fear of guns. So, he took on a few sidekicks as most heroes would, with all of them using firearms in some way. But he never, ever truly considered taking a kid under his wing to take his place, or at least learn everything he did. All it took was one green-haired youngin to turn that all around. Izuku was everything he wished he had been when he was training to become a pro hero. He had drive, skill, talent, but most importantly, a giant brain on his shoulders. The kid practically absorbed information like a sponge and held it like a bank vault. Over the past few days, and a few subtle jabs by his sister, he has come to realize that Izuku was unofficially becoming the successor he stated he would never have. Even his sidekick joked about when he would be bringing Izuku by to help with the agency's paperwork. So, as he stood in the main lobby without his hat and mask, he could only truly contemplate what he was about to do as his sister bounced around in excitement. "You are gonna do it?" she squealed, her glasses glinting with joy and a bit of maniacal flair. "My big bad wolf of a brother is going to take on a little cub." "Sarah, I swear," he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "If you go on about this and freak out those two, I will personally dig your grave before I bury you in it." At that, his sister calmed down somewhat, but it was clear that she was still completely elated. "Aye, aye, Captain," she stated with a sarcastic salute, before heading around to tend to the customers. Thankfully, it was that moment that Izuku and Inko Midoriya walked into the building, though a little inquisitive due to a message he had sent them earlier saying that he had an important matter to discuss with the two of them. "Hey there, you two," Han said, giving them a slight wave. Inko and Izuku both looked at him for a moment, before their eyes widened in recognition. "Oh yeah, forgot that they haven't seen me without the mask before," Han thought, walking up to the Midoriya family. Hello sensei," Izuku replied immediately, though still processing the fact that he could actually see his face for the first time. Inko herself gave a wave back, but looked even more taken by surprise than Izuku was. "Wait, is she blushing? Are you feeling all right, Mrs. Midor-? Inko," she interrupted, her voice coming out almost like a squeak. "You can call me Inko." At that, Han froze up slightly, though his tan skin tone made his likely present blush indiscernible from the rest of his face. "Well, all right then," he replied, a soft smile appearing. Are you feeling all right, Inko? I'm okay, Han. The silence after that was particularly awkward, as neither party knew what to say to the other from there. Ahem! Everyone turned to look at Sarah, who was leaning over the counter with a sly grin. My brother here has some important information to discuss, so how about you all move up to the conference room? At that, Han finally broke out of his funk, turning quickly to the two Midoriyas. Ah yes, that's a great idea, he began, beginning to move to the elevator. Come and follow me. Inko was already in a good mood today. The sun was out, the weather was nice, and her son was just as happy as ever. It was everything she could ask for. Before she left the apartment to pick up Izuku, she had gotten a message on her phone from an unknown number. Unknown. Hello, Mrs. Midoriya. This is Han Saikaku. Inko took a moment to process who she knew by that name, before it clicked, and she immediately registered his contact information. Inko. Hello, how are you? Han. Currently, I'm a bit tired, though nothing to really be worried about. Han. More importantly, would it be possible for you to come into the session with Izuku today? I have a few important matters that I would like to discuss with the two of you. Inko, of course. I was about to pick him up from school, so we will be there soon. Han. Perfect. I will see you then. With that, Inko put away her phone and went about gathering the last of her things before she left. That was interesting. I wonder what's so important, she thought, making her way outside and locking the door. The drive to pick up Izuku and take him to the shop was uneventful as usual, but still just as quiet and content. When they arrived, however, she didn't quite regard the gray-haired man standing by the counter, though he did seem a little familiar. When he called them over, however, she was split between feeling embarrassed that she didn't recognize the pro hero and being taken back by how handsome he was beneath the mask he always wears. His darker skin tone, gray hair, and silver eyes made it easy to spot the relation he and Sarah had. His face was well-defined, already enhancing his other features, though she did notice that he had what appeared to be a thick scar traveling from his right temple to his chin. From there, introductions were said, though her mind was clearly wandering to other things. At the last moment, however, she just had to blurt out to call her Inko instead of Mrs. Midoriya. It's only fair, she told herself. I call him by his given name already. It is completely just a friendly formality. Though, she pretended not to see the wink Sarah gave her before getting their meeting back on track. She could tell that her son was off-put by his teacher not wearing his normal head attire with the rest of his hero costume, though he did a better job of calming down than she was. Why does he have to be so bad, Inko? Right in here, you too, Han stated, holding open the door to what appeared to be a small conference room. Making their way into two of the seats, the two Midoriyas waited intently as the man closed the door and got settled in. So, I can tell you are wondering why I wanted you both here? He began, receiving nods from both Izuku and Inko. Well, as you know, today marks the last month we have together before our session's end, and Izuku receives his firearm certification, as well as his Quirk use license, though both are only allowed to be used in self-defense, until he gets his provisional hero license, that is. Provisional hero license? Inko asked, with a bit of shock in her voice. When and how was he supposed to get that? Well, that won't be for several years, Inko, he replied, sitting up in his seat. But what I wanted to talk to you two about will be quite important considering Izuku's future. At that, the room's demeanor became quite a bit more serious, with Izuku and Inko straightening in their seats. And my future, sensei? Izuku asked, his mind already deep in thought as to what the pro-hero meant. Yes, Izuku, you future as a hero. Inko gave a slight gasp, not out of surprise because Han had said that, but because of how assured he sounded. Have either of you ever heard about the practice of heroes taking on successors? Han asked, looking intently at the two across the table. Yes, sir, though it is somewhat uncommon, Izuku replied, his mind having produced the answer in an instant. I believe I have heard about it once or twice, from either Izuku or the news, she stated, now even more curious as to what was going on. Well, Inko, I want to make sure Izuku has the ability to fulfill his dreams as best possible, and with the way society treats heroes who use firearms like he will have to, I also want to make sure he is completely prepared for that future. What are you suggesting, Han? Inko asked, though inside, she knew what was coming next. Inko, I want your permission to take Izuku under my wing as my successor, he stated, his eyes shining with the determination present in his voice. I want him to become the best hero he can. The room went dead silent, the request being made by the pro-hero being processed by the other two in the room. Inko herself already knew her answer, but looked to Izuku before she decided. Looking back at her were the glistening eyes of her son, silently pleading for her to say yes. That was all she truly needed. Her son comes first, and she knew that the pro-hero snipe, Han Saikaku, would have the same interests in mind. As long as Izuku wishes to do so, you have my blessing and utmost approval, she stated, a large smile adorning her features. With that, she took her son into a hug, tears already flowing from him as he attempted to wipe them away. Han looked her in the eyes and gave a curt nod, a smile appearing on his face as well. The first step then, kiddo, he began, getting Izuku's attention, is getting you into UA. Chapter 6. Steady as he goes. Smack. Ow wow. You need to be faster, Han stated, pulling back the fly swatter from Izuku's head. Try again. Izuku sighed, and proceeded to begin disassembling the AR model rifle under his teacher's supervision. This was the most recent of many exercises Snipe had been putting him through in the months following him becoming the pro-hero's official successor. Izuku had already mastered assembling and disassembling pistols and shotguns, so now he was moving on to the third weapon type he mastered, the rifle, specifically semi- and fully automatic rifles. Han had told him that he would learn to master longer-range rifles later. So far, he has yet to disassemble and reassemble the rifle in front of him in less than 2 minutes, though it was only his third try. They continued to do this for the next half hour, with Izuku finally managing to get it down to a minute. Afterwards, they moved on to the usual physical exercises, though with increased difficulty to account for the gains in muscle Izuku has made. Hey sensei, Izuku said, drying off the sweat from his hair with a towel. I've been thinking about what you said about you getting me into UA as a recommended student, but what exactly does that entail? Well, Han sighed, scratching the back of his neck. I can't tell you. What do you mean? Exactly what I said, kiddo. My lips are sealed. Why can't you tell me? Izuku questioned, now curious as to why his mentor was suddenly so tight-lipped. Is it because you are a teacher? Han looked at Izuku and chuckled. Nah, not quite. It's more along the lines that while you may be getting in on recommendations, the principal will still have you tested with an exhibition, so to speak. However, I can't tell you what that entails, or I'll have hell to pay from Nedzu. Oh, don't worry though, Han stated, patting his successor on the head. I'm sure whatever you have to do won't be too insane. Izuku paled a bit, but decided to leave it be. The two talked about Izuku's training for tomorrow before they finally made their way down the stairs into the retail floor. Ah, Sarah exclaimed, catching the attention of the pair. Over here you two. Inko's here early. They saw that Inko was in fact there at the counter, and looked to be in the middle of talking to Sarah before the men had arrived. Hi dear, how was training? Inko asked, giving a smile to the both of them. It's been going all right, though I still have a lot of work to do when it comes to these rifle models, Izuku replied, giving his mother a hug. He'll figure it out as always though, Han interjected, poking Izuku in the forehead. With that big brain of his. Oh, I just know he will, Han. It's not like he isn't breezing through his school classes with flying colors or anything, she stated, giving Izuku a knowing grin. Well, he's definitely smarter than me and my brother were in our younger years, Sarah laughed, getting a flick on the shoulder from Han. Don't act like you were as smart as Izuku when you were his age, Han. I know you struggled to pass any class that wasn't math-related. Okay, that's enough out of you, especially since you struggled just as much as I did. Han pouted, a slightly gloomy aura visible even through his mask. Izuku was growing to become used to this daily banter between the four of them whenever sessions ended. Over the months Izuku had been there, his mom and Sarah had close friends. She even introduced her to Aunt Mitsuki, causing the three of them to go out to eat quite often. Meanwhile, Han had also come to know the two Midoriyas quite well, though Izuku was beginning to think that his mom had a thing going for his teacher. "Well, it's time for me to get Izuku here home," Inko stated. "I still have to make dinner and get some paperwork done for the office." "See you tomorrow then," Han replied, giving them a wave as they left. "So when are you gonna ask her?" Sarah questioned, her tone becoming a tad more serious than usual. "I don't know, sis," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "It just doesn't seem like the right time. I don't even know if she would say yes." Han recoiled as he felt a sharp smack against the back of his head, his sister now leaning over the counter with her arm outstretched. "I know you aren't that stupid, Han. So pull yourself together already and be a man about it." "But Dash." "No buts," she stated, pointing her index finger into his face. "You go ask that lovely woman on a date, or so help me God I will arrange you two together myself." Han just gave a defeated sigh and raised his hands in surrender. Seemingly satisfied, Sarah left him be to go tend to the store. He looked over to the door of the shop, pondering his choices. "I suppose I might as well, huh?" Izuku walked the halls of Aldera High School once again, and so far he hadn't gotten any stares. Over the last 4 months less and less people gave him any mind, seemingly growing used to him having a quirk. Though, the one change Izuku still couldn't wrap his head around was the complete separation Katsuki had made between the two of them. While it definitely wasn't a bad thing, the fact that the explosive blonde is completely disregarding Izuku's existence and making a point to stay away from him is disconcerting. Though, every so often Izuku catches Katsuki glaring at him from the corner of his eye. Not just that, but in class he has noticed Katsuki has bandage wrappings peeking out from under his uniform sleeves. "Midoriya, tell me what organization within the government is responsible for quirk research and regulation?" the teacher asked, now looking toward the green-haired boy. "Its technical name is the National Citizen Quirk Registration Organization, though the normally used name is just the Quirk Registry," Izuku replied, before settling back into his thoughts. He normally didn't pay much attention in his government class, as Snipe-sensei had already grilled all of this information into his brain since it was integral to understanding quirk laws. To be blatantly honest, the only classes Izuku still paid attention in were math and English, as while he still knew most of the information in them, he still couldn't help but want to brush up on them. Once again, the day passed uneventfully. Izuku made his way out of the school and met his mother at home so he could head to his training. Though, as he walked up to the apartment, he noticed that there was a gray truck in the parking area he hadn't seen before next to his mother's car. He made his way to the door and went to knock, but was interrupted by the door opening at the last moment. Izuku looked up and saw that his sensei was looking right back at him, in his hero attire minus the hat, mask, gun, and cape. "Hey there, kiddo," Han chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry if I startled ya." "Hi, sensei," Izuku replied. "What brings you here?" "Just some business with your mother," he stated quickly. "You know, paperwork and stuff." Izuku pondered that for a moment, noting that he could see the man tense up slightly when he asked the question, as well as his face was blushing. "Okay," he replied, though Izuku was beginning to have doubts about the validity of that statement. "Actually, since I'm here you can just come with me to the shop if you want," Han stated, stepping out of the door into the front walkway. Izuku's eyes widened with surprise, but relaxed as it was the logical choice. "Sure thing, sensei. Let me change out of my uniform real fast." "Take your time. I'll be in the gray pickup in the parking spot next to Inko's car." Izuku nodded in reply, and then proceeded to rush to his room to change. He swapped out his clothes for some loose workout gear, and picked up his duffel bag which had everything he needed for training, minus the notebook he kept on his person at all times with his ideas for quirk and physical development. He quickly left the room, peeking his head into the living room to yell, "I'm leaving for training with Snipe-sensei." "Alrighty, dear," Inko replied, likely from the kitchen. "I'll be there to pick you up as usual." With that, Izuku went back outside to the truck he spotted earlier, and sure enough his mentor was inside. Izuku took his bag off his shoulder as he entered the vehicle, opting to set it on his lap instead of the back seat. As they got going, Izuku realized that the radio wasn't playing the normal classical music he was used to, and instead was playing something in English which was heavy on vocals and guitar. "What genre of music is this, sensei?" he asked, genuinely curious. "This here is country music," he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "I came to like it quite a bit during my time in America as a kid." "You lived in America?" "Sure did. My dad was in the oil business, so my family moved to a state called Texas where he was in charge of an oil refinery. Hell, I even based my costume off of the old Western era in the United States, where it was known to be a haven for expert gunslingers and outlaws." "Sounds like quite the place, sensei." "You done with the warm-ups, Izuku?" Han asked as he finished sending a message on his phone. "Yup," he replied, getting up from the floor. "Then come on over here," Han stated, hearing the elevator open behind him. "I have a friend here I want you to meet." Izuku's eyes widened as he walked, now noticing just who was walking into the room. "T the battle hero? Gunhead?" Izuku stammered, standing up straight as he scrambled to get his hero notebook out. "Nice to meet you, Izuku Midoriya," he stated, waving at the boy. "Snipe here has told me quite a bit about you." "Could you sign this?" Izuku asked, handing the hero his notebook, which was open to his respective pages. "I'd love to," the hero replied, immediately signing in a blank spot on the paper. "Say, kid, these are some excellent observations you have. Quite the analyst, aren't you?" At that, Izuku shrank a bit from the praise, a bit of embarrassment coming to the surface. "Yeah, I study other heroes as a way of finding ways to improve myself." Gunhead walked over and patted Izuku on the shoulder. "With that kind of commitment, you'll make a great hero, I'm sure of it." "Thank you, sir," Izuku replied, a bright smile visible on his face. "Now that the greetings are settled," Han interjected, gathering the attention of the other two, "I would like to get right into the special training Gunhead here is willing to give you." Izuku perked up at that, his brain immediately switching gears into training mode. "Your sensei here called in a favor and asked that I teach you the foundations of my martial arts style," Gunhead stated, putting his hands on his hips, "which is perfect for you since your body type is more suited for speed and endurance rather than brute force." Izuku was already furiously going through his notebook, adding notes and referencing previous ideas he had on his ability to fight without relying on his guns. "I see, and since you also use your quirk which is comparable to a firearm in tandem with that fighting style, I would also likely be able to adapt my quirk in such a way as well," Izuku mused, closing his notebook. "Right on the mark, kid," Gunhead replied, as he began walking towards one of the padded areas in the training room. "So, let's get right to it." Izuku has felt sore, tired, and in pain before. This was a new kind of pain. Izuku was struggling to breath right after he had attempted once again to knock Gunhead off his feet, and was once again left on the floor, struggling to catch his breath. For such a nice person, Izuku didn't quite realize that he could punch hard enough to blow the air right out of his lungs. Izuku looked up and saw a hand being offered by the pro hero, which he gladly accepted to get back on his feet. "Well, kid, I think you have made a stellar amount of progress today," Gunhead stated, gently patting Izuku on the back. "It really helps that Snipe here has already had you bulking up, which gives us much more time to focus on the technique rather than the physical exercise." That dash, Izuku paused, catching his breath properly. "That was some of the most intense exercise I have done since I began training, Gunhead sensei." At that, the pro hero just laughed and gave a thumbs up. "Well then you'd better get used to this once again, Izuku," Han stated, getting up from the chair he was observing from. "Especially since Gunhead here will be coming in to teach you 3 times a week." Izuku paled a bit, but immediately became reinvigorated, as what Gunhead was teaching him would become an invaluable asset as a hero. Izuku looked to his new teacher and bowed. "Thank you for this opportunity, Gunhead sensei." "It's no problem at all, kid," he replied, waving his hand back and forth in the air. "I'm just glad to be having a part in raising the next generation of heroes." "Well, we'd best be finishing up," Han interjected. "Izuku's mother should be here to take him home any minute now." "Ah, I see," Gunhead replied, taking a moment to stretch out his shoulders. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Izuku. Keep on working hard, and I'll see you in 2 days." Izuku took the hand gunhead offered and shook it, a determined smile adorning his face. I won't let you down. The trio then got cleaned up and all made their way downstairs. And for a rare occasion, Inko wasn't there waiting with Sarah. In fact, Sarah was nowhere to be seen as well. After seeing Gunhead out, the remaining pair made their way to the store counter. Where is Sarah at, sensei? Izuku asked, looking about the store. She's usually always here. Said something about checking out early today to help a friend. I believe, Han replied, shrugging his shoulders. Izuku nodded, accepting that the normally boisterous woman wouldn't be around today to chat with. At that moment, however, he heard a phone ring go off and pulled out his phone from his bag to find that it wasn't his. Hello? Han asked, his phone already in hand. Yup, we're all done for today. Oh, of course, I can take him home. All right, see you then. Han hung up the call and looked towards Izuku, who was watching with a bit of curiosity. Looks like I'm taking you home, kiddo, though I'm gonna need a minute to change into some more casual clothes, Han stated, giving a smile to Izuku. Is everything all right? Izuku questioned, wondering why his mother wasn't able to pick him up, which was a definite first. She's doing fine. She was just running behind on some errands apparently, the man replied, already headed into the back room. Just wait for me. I'll be out in a minute. So, Izuku waited patiently, looking through some of the minor hero news that had happened throughout the day. The new hero Kamui Woods had just made a couple arrests, which has added to his already large fanbase even though he has only been around for about a month. He turned to look when he heard the door behind him open, seeing his sensei had cleaned up quite a bit. His gray locks were tied into a bun on the back of his head, and his hero attire was replaced by a button-up shirt the same shade of maroon as the KP normally wears, with a pair of jeans and brown boots. Ready to go? Han asked, shouldering the duffel bag which held his hero costume. Best not keep your mother waiting for us. Izuku nodded and followed along, once again getting into the truck and heading off to his home. The drive itself was uneventful, and Izuku was beginning to feel tired from the workout he did today. Izuku persevered, however, and decided he was going to go to bed a bit earlier tonight since he had minimal homework to finish. He must have been more tired than he thought, as he didn't even notice they had arrived until Han had shaken him. Wake on up, kid, you're home, he said gently, giving Izuku a small smile. Thank you for the ride, sensei, Izuku stated, and left the truck. He waved as Han drove away, and then proceeded to make his way into the apartment. To his surprise, he found his mother in the living room, wearing one of her older fall dresses and a nice dark green coat to go with it. Oh, hi honey, Inko began, getting up to hug her son. Dinner is already set out on the table for you, though I'm headed out to eat dinner with a friend of mine. Izuku hugged her back, but slowly processed what she was saying. Suddenly, the pieces all clicked together. His mother was going on a date with Han. It should have hit sooner really, between his sensei showing up at his home without telling him, Sarah being gone from the store to help a friend, and his mother not being able to pick him up because she was running late with errands, which was likely her and Sarah running behind on finding her a nice outfit to wear. Go on and enjoy your dinner with Han, Mom, Izuku stated, a sly grin on his mouth forming as his mother grew a deep shade of red. I will, dear, she stuttered. Though I won't be home until later tonight, so be sure to get your work done and get to sleep at a decent time. Yes, Mom, Izuku groaned, as Inko smothered him in another hug. With that, Inko left the house and drove away in her car, leaving Izuku home alone. As Izuku ate his dinner, he couldn't help but feel a bit lonely in the small apartment. His mom had always been home whenever he was, no exceptions. Now it was just too quiet. Chapter 7. Slime Time. It's your last year of high school, bud, and it's time to start getting you ready for the UA entrance exams. Izuku looked up from his laptop. The afternoon feed of news for the day opened as he wrote his daily analysis of heroes featured in the videos posted there. I thought that was the plan from the beginning, sensei? Well, you're partially right, Han mused, pulling up a chair next to his protege. But what we have to prepare you for in reality is the recommendations exam. The what? Han chuckled and rubbed Izuku on the head, eliciting a slight grumble from the boy. I'm sure you remember how students can be recommended into the hero course, And that's just what I plan on doing, kiddo. However, to be accepted, you have to display your ability in whatever ways Principal Nezu plans for you. Izuku pondered that for a moment, fixing his ruffled hair into a slightly more manageable mess. I don't see how that needs much preparation. All things considered, OW. Izuku recoiled slightly from the quick flick on the forehead he received, for a reason completely unknown to him. First rule of hero work: be prepared for everything, Han stated, poking Izuku again as he rubbed his forehead. Also, Nezu is likely the most intelligent being you will ever encounter, and his schemes know no bounds. Okay, I get it. Izuku resigned, waving his hands back and forth as the man across from him stared him down. So, what exactly do I need to get ready for? It's quite simple, really. I'm going to teach you how to fight. Gunhead Sensei has been teaching me martial arts for a while now, and I am fairly confident in my shooting ability. Both are true, but you have yet to use both your quirk and your combat prowess at the same time. Izuku's eyes widened a bit before he face-bombed himself, hiding the ecstatic grin growing on his face. Of course, now I feel a bit dumb for overlooking that, sensei. Han laughed as he patted Izuku on the shoulder. We all make mistakes sometimes, kiddo. So, what did you have in mind? Izuku asked, putting away his laptop into his backpack. I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to integrate the shooting aspect of my skills into the martial aspect. Well, we're going to start by using these, Han stated, setting down a large box on the table in front of Izuku. He watched as Han opened the lid, revealing a plethora of different types of guns. Though Izuku was quick to notice that all of them had distinct orange tips on the end of the barrel. These are airsoft guns, and these are what we will use while we spar to prevent major injury. They fire plastic pellets with compressed air, right? Izuku pondered, testing the weight of one of the pistol replicas. Also, these are pretty light compared to their real counterparts. You are correct with your first question, Han replied, pulling up another box that was filled with the magazines and ammunition to go with the guns. And yes, they are lighter than they normally would be, but there are no real alternatives to the real deal besides these. I, for one, don't feel like getting accidentally shot while you are throwing me around. Izuku wanted to say otherwise, but realized that there really was no other training method that could be used. You know, my quirk makes training a pain sometimes. Han looked at him for a moment and gave him a small smile, reaching out to embrace the boy in a hug. Izuku tensed slightly, not expecting the hug, but immediately returning the gesture. Han wasn't the most physical of people from what Izuku had gathered over the time he had come to know him. His displays of affection were often subtle, but meaningful all the same. Izuku, look at me. He pulled back from the hug, looking his mentor in the eyes. Yeah. I want you to know that after all this time, I have never been more proud of you. Everything you have done and are going to do. He paused, taking a deep breath. Izuku, you are like a son to me, and I don't care if you consider me a father figure or not. But I want you to know that I will always be in your corner, no matter what. Han closed his eyes for a moment, waiting for what was sure to be a bit of backlash, or even rejection from Izuku. He was caught off guard, however, when he heard a sniffle come from in front of him, and opened his eyes to see tears trailing down Izuku's face. I am sorry. That was a bit much. Han was cut off as he tried to backpedal. As Izuku pulled Han into a tight hug, holding on to him with no sign of letting go. He froze for a moment, not knowing what to do. All his life, he wasn't the most emotional of people, but he couldn't say a word as his throat tightened up, and the hints of tears began to peek out of his eyes. Thank you, Izuku squeaked out, his hug growing tighter around Han, as if he would run away the moment he let go. At that moment, the wall around Han's heart broke, and he let his tears fall as he embraced Izuku tightly, rubbing small circles on his back. They stayed that way for a minute, neither speaking a word to break the calm silence that filled the room. Eventually, though, Han decided it was as good a time as any to ask an important question. Izuku, you know that me and your mother have been dating for almost 2 years now, and I wanted to do something special for the both of you for our anniversary. He pulled himself out of the hug, looking at Izuku as his mind began churning as to what Han could want to do. It really has been 2 years, huh? Izuku mused, before rubbing his face to clean it off. What did you have in mind? I want your permission first, but… Han trailed off, thinking on what the right words to say are. Go on, sensei. Izuku started with a reassuring smile. I'm listening. Han thought for a moment longer before steeling himself and saying, I would like for you and Inko to come live with me. Izuku went wide-eyed for a moment. His expectations shattered in one sentence. Wait. Move in with you? Are you sure? I mean I note gainstit butitis alato a scafayu dash. Izuku. Han interrupted, poking him on the forehead. Slower so I can understand. He shut up immediately, before calming himself down from his frantic mumbling. I would be okay with it, but are you sure? I don't want you to do this because you feel obligated or anything like that. It was Han's turn to be slightly surprised, before he settled back down into a grin. Kiddo, nothing would make me happier than having two of the most important people in my life coming to live with me. Izuku gave Han a beaming smile, before suddenly switching to dead serious, throwing Han for a loop. His eyes were giving a scrutinizing glare towards Han, causing the older man to have a bead of sweat to slide down his head. Just so you are aware, if you hurt my mother in any way, well, you know how good of a shot I am, he stated, staring for a moment longer before the shadows covering his eyes disappeared completely. I wouldn't dream of it, Han chuckled, pushing away the nervousness he suddenly had around his protégé. Both of them jumped, however, as an alarm went off in Han's pocket, which they both recognized as their time for the day running out. Looks like we'll have to get to that training tomorrow. Han sighed, getting up out of his chair to retrieve his mask and hat from the table behind him. Izuku followed suit and grabbed his belongings before heading downstairs. Izuku had kept quiet about Han's surprise to his mother, who luckily didn't catch on. He kept writing in his notebook, only half paying attention to his teacher wrapping up his calculus lesson on derivatives. Though he was forced to come back to reality when the class suddenly erupted into chaos, the students blatantly ignoring the rules about no quirk usage in class. Don't lump me in with the rest of these background characters, teach. The author didn't even bother to describe any of them. Katsuki yelled from his chair at the front of the class. I already aced the mock tests for UA, and my quirk is leagues above the rest of these rejects. Hey! Screw you. Settle down, class? The teacher stated, making the annoyed students quiet down somewhat. Oh, isn't Midoriya also applying to UA? At this point Izuku was now completely in the moment, a bit of embarrassment creeping into his mind at the whole class now staring him down with looks ranging from curiosity to anger, though that last look was coming from one person in particular. Hi-ya? The hell is that about Deku? Katsuki growled, leaping his way across the room and slamming his hand into Izuku's desk, some smoke coming off from the impact. I have every right to take that exam as you do, Katsuki, and so does everyone else in this room, he declared, though some old fear tingled at the back of his mind, causing him to slide down his chair ever so slightly. That's a load of bullshit and you know it. The only person in this room fit to be a hero is me, and definitely not a wannabe like you. Izuku was about to respond when the teacher finally called the class back to order, making Katsuki click his tongue in annoyance and return to his seat. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, though Katsuki did shoulder check him on the way out, mumbling something about him being a bastard under his breath. Izuku took it in stride, however, as this treatment was nothing compared to how he could have been treated his first year. Hell, Katsuki would have probably blown something of his up and thrown it out a window. So he began his trek home, some music playing in his earphones as he walked. His mind was wandering quite a bit as he passed under the usual overpass, causing him to jump when he heard a loud clang of metal behind him. Right as he went to look around, his world became a living hell. He tried to call for help as his body was suddenly engulfed by a disgusting, slime-like substance. Izuku shut up immediately as he felt the slime try to force its way down his throat, and he began to try and claw it off his mouth so he could get another breath in, but the substance kept filling in as fast as he could move it. Thanks for the help, kid, a muffled voice told him, though Izuku couldn't tell where it was coming from as it sounded like it was coming from the slime itself. You are really saving my ass right now by serving as an invisibility cloak for me. Izuku stopped moving his body entirely, but covered his mouth tightly with his hands. in a desperate attempt to conserve oxygen. Think, there has to be something you can do. Izuku thought in his head, ideas flowing at a mile a minute, his lungs beginning to hurt from the lack of air. Can I make something? Anything? I don't have enough skin showing to make anything but a pistol. Anywhere else and I won't be able to get it from inside my clothes. His thoughts became fuzzy, however, as the pain in his lungs overcame all of his focus, his mind screaming at him to breath. He opened his eyes one last time, just to widen in awe as a hulking figure at the end of the tunnel pulled back his arm to throw a punch. But then everything went black. "EY, hey kid, are you okay?" Izuku groaned as he felt a light stinging pain come from his cheek. His eyes slowly opening to reveal a giant man in cargo pants and a white shirt looking down upon him. "Oh wait, that's All Might. Oh wait, that's All Might. All Might?" he exclaimed, shooting up to his feet instantly. "Yes, it's me, All Might," he laughed, his voice booming in the deserted street they were on. "I'm glad to see you are all right, young man. I thought we lost you there for a moment." "I am okay, sir. But what about the villain?" "That evildoer is right here," he stated, tapping his finger on a soda bottle in his pocket, its contents a dark green sludge. "I'm terribly sorry you got caught in the crossfire, but I'm afraid I must take this villain to the police right away." "Wait, can I have you?" Izuku began, but went wide-eyed as he opened up his hero notebook from his damp backpack to find a massive signature on the first open page. "You already signed it. Thank you very much," Izuku stated, bowing at the number 1 hero. "The pleasure is all mine, but I'm afraid I must leave with haste. Being a hero is a job where time is of the essence," All Might stated, posing in the afternoon sunlight just like Izuku had seen so many times on the news. "Of course, I wouldn't want to keep you waiting any longer than I have already. Thank you for saving me again." "You are welcome, young man, and I must apologize once more for causing you to be caught by this villain here, even if it was momentary," the giant man said, reaching out and patting Izuku on the shoulder. "Anywho, I must be off now, so have a fine day." With that, Izuku had to catch himself as he stumbled from the sheer force All Might gave off as he leapt into the air. Izuku watched one of his idols soar off across the skyline, before disappearing behind a taller skyscraper. As he began to put his belongings together, he realized 2 important things. First, he smelled terrible, and second, he didn't ask any of the questions he had saved in his notebooks about the hero should he ever get a once-in-a-lifetime chance to speak to the number 1 hero, which he just had. All he could do was sigh as he slung his backpack over his shoulder and retrieved his phone from his pocket, which thankfully had a waterproof case. His earbuds, on the other hand, were quite unusable at this point, much to his disappointment. So, Izuku double-timed it back home, eager to tell his mom how his day went. Actually, maybe he should tone down some of the villain attack details just for her sake. He didn't quite feel like having to calm down his mother from a full worry attack. So, he made his way through the more crowded city streets, trying to ignore the way people scrunched their noses at the awful smell coming off of him from the villain who held him but a few minutes ago. He would definitely need a shower when he got home. Boom. Izuku stopped in his tracks and looked down the street where a cloud of dark gray smoke began to rise from behind several shops. As much as he wanted to get home, his primitive instincts to see more hero fights sent him towards the commotion, his feet carrying him against the flow of passers-by trying to avoid the scene. As he reached the main crowd of spectators, he managed to get a good look past the police barricade at the street ahead. He spotted 2 heroes already present, Death Arms, Backdraft, and even the rising star Kamui Woods were already moving towards the villain. Boom. Izuku had to cover his face to not hurt his eyes from the sheer force of the explosion that just occurred, his mind racing to think of how this fight will pan out. Backdraft is a rescue-oriented hero, so he likely won't be participating in combat, but can definitely work on the fires all over this street. Death Arms and Kamui Woods might be in trouble though, as it will be dangerous for either of them to get close enough to the villain to make optimal use of their combat styles, and the explosions are a direct counter to Arbor Kamui Woods' quirk. He thought, taking a scrutinizing gaze through the thick smoke that was filling the air of the street. For a moment, however, the air cleared, and for that moment the world might as well have frozen still for Izuku. At the far end of the street, he saw a towering mass of green shifting in the smoke, a set of eyes and a mouth maniacally looking about the devastation being caused by the boy it had in its hold. That boy it had was none other than Katsuki Bakugo, and the pure fear coming from the blonde boy's gaze sent Izuku barreling straight through the police barricade. He completely ignored the cries of the policemen and heroes, his feet carrying him through the smoke and fire even though his eyes stung from the thick air. "Kakin!" he yelled, getting the blonde's attention through the chaos. But that also happened to get the slime villain's attention. "What the hell? Who knew I'd see the same stupid kid twice in the same day?" The villain chuckled, its smile growing wicked as it turned to face Izuku. "I'll have fun tearing you up now that All Might isn't around here to save you anymore." The moment Izuku was in range of the villain, he pulled out the weapon he had been making from his arm and dove into a roll, avoiding the blindingly fast swipe the sludge sent his way. Before it could make a second attack, Izuku pulled back on the slingshot and fired a cluster of metal pellets straight into the villain's eyes. "Arg! You bastard!" he yelled, but Izuku was already capitalizing on the temporary blindness he had instilled by gripping one of Katsuki's arms and pulling as hard as he could. His old friend looked at him with a mixture of anger, shock, and relief before Izuku could contemplate it. The explosive boy's face contorted into one of seething rage as he let loose an earth-shaking explosion into the slime villain, sending pieces of the villain all over the back end of the street. Izuku slowly rubbed the ringing out of his ears, looking at the devastation around him. He quickly threw his slingshot into one of the nearby fires, destroying any real evidence of him using a weapon on the villain, which he was sure was borderline illegal without a license of any sort. After throwing away the wooden weapon, he looked over at Katsuki and saw him staring right back at him, his face set into a look of deep thought which Izuku had seldom seen on him. Before he could say anything, he was swarmed by policemen and death arms, while Katsuki was treated the same but with Kemui woods instead. It was all a blur to Izuku, between the stern lectures being given by the police and the pro-heroes, and news reporters trying to get him to say something for their reports. He was thoroughly overwhelmed. He watched as they praised Katsuki for being a victim and potentially making the situation worse by unleashing large explosions in the street. But Izuku pushed those more cynical thoughts down in place of just being happy he was alright. The police managed to get all of the individual pieces of the slime villain into sealed containers, and Izuku was surprised to find that the villain was completely fine from a look, though he appeared to be unconscious from being split apart. As he was finished being checked out by the paramedics on site, he suddenly realized that All Might had captured this villain in 2 soda bottles. So just how had the villain escaped from the #1 hero? At that very moment, a commotion occurred behind Izuku, and he turned around to see All Might himself making his way towards Izuku. "Well, who would have thought we would encounter each other in the same day, young man?" He-Man bellowed, the paramedic gazing in awe at the imposing figure of the symbol of peace. "I'm terribly sorry that this event came to pass, but I failed to notice that the villain the police had apprehended had fallen out of my pockets until I reached the station. For that mistake, I am terribly sorry." Izuku had to do a double take as the strongest hero in the nation bowed toward Izuku, his ever-present smile somehow seeming slightly solemn and regretful. It's okay, All Might. I'm sure all heroes make mistakes sometimes, and it would be better to happen now than during an important villain confrontation." The hero seemed to contemplate Izuku's words for a moment before letting out a hearty laugh. "I suppose you are right, young man. I won't keep you any longer, but I must say my apologies to the other young man here till I head on my way, considering how well this situation was handled." All Might then turned to the crowd who was eating up every word he said, where he gave a grand pose for the cameras, and then leapt into the skyline, disappearing from sight. After that, Izuku didn't get much more scolding, though one of the police officers did get through a final "be careful" before Izuku was allowed to leave. Izuku felt a bit sorry for Katsuki since he had to be carted off to the hospital to make sure he was medically cleared, much to the blonde's dismay. Izuku made his way home, the sun slowly setting over the horizon, setting the sky in a deep orange hue. He couldn't help but admire the colors splayed out, like a piece of living art. Time seemed to fly as he made his way home, the apartment door appearing in front of him in what felt like a few minutes, even though he had been walking for twice that time. Before he even entered his apartment, he heard a truck pull up behind him and turned to see Han jumping out the moment it was parked. The man ran straight towards him and pulled a surprised Izuku into a tight hug, squeezing the air out of him. "You all right, kiddo?" he asked, pulling back from the bear hug he just crushed Izuku in and taking a look at him. "I'm fine. Just want to clean myself until every trace of slime odor is forever expunged from my body," Izuku stated flatly, a small shiver going down his spine as he caught a whiff of the smell coming from his clothes. "Let's go see your mom first then," Han replied, patting Izuku on the shoulder with a small smile, "because she sounded extremely worried when she called me earlier." Agreed. As the two men entered the house, Inko came barreling straight into them, tears already flowing and a wad of tissues in hand. "My baby boy, are you okay? Did you get hurt?" "Mom, I'm perfectly fine," Izuku soothed frantically, with him and Han doing their best to bring her down from her hysterics into a more stable emotional state before she passed out. But the villain. The news lady said that it had gotten you as well before All Might saved you." "Exactly. All Might saved me and I was unhurt because of him. But then I watched you go running in to save Katsuki. I fainted when I saw you run straight in to save him. Don't worry. Me and Katsuki managed to get out of that with little more than some scoldings from the police and heroes there." Inko and Izuku stopped their back and forth when Han coughed loudly into his hand, interrupting the two now that he saw that Inko was somewhat calmer. "Inko darlin', why don't you let the poor boy get himself cleaned up, and then we can talk over dinner?" he suggested, subtly pushing Izuku towards his room. Not one to lose out on a chance to get away from his mother's suffocating attention, Izuku stepped into his room and locked the door before she could protest, immediately dropping his backpack to the ground. Thankfully, nobody tried to bother him as he spent the next hour thoroughly cleaning himself until his skin stung and his body smelled like Old Spice. After leaving the shower and throwing his now empty backpack into the washing machine, he walked out into the living room to find Han watching the news footage of the villain attack, while his mother was setting down the food for dinner. "Ah, I was about to come get you, kiddo," Han said, noticing Izuku walking into the room. "You feeling any better?" "Without a doubt," Izuku sighed, taking a seat at the table with his mother, while Han got up and muted the TV. He looked over and saw footage from a helicopter that showed All Might standing in front of the large crowd, giving one of his many poses for the cameras. "Honey, you never said you met All Might," Inko exclaimed, as she looked at the screen to see the moment the symbol of peace bowed at her son. Even Han seemed to look shocked as he watched the news feed. "Yeah, he was even cooler in person than in any of the videos I've seen of him," Izuku replied happily, the feelings of glee he had felt then surfacing momentarily. "Well, good for you, Izuku, though I'm sure you will see him at least a few more times during your career as a hero," Han stated, though both Izuku and Inko missed the small smirk Han held on his face before turning back to face the people at the table. "Though, I suppose this ain't the best time, but I already worked myself up for it, so I might as well ask now." At that, both of the Midoriyas turned away from the TV to hear what he had to say. Izuku had an idea, and was already trying incredibly hard to hide the smile he wanted to give. "What did you have to ask?" Inko wondered, slightly cocking her head in thought. "We've both been dating now for a while, Inko, but I feel like I've known you and your son my whole life. I've already made sure this was all right with Izuku here, but I would be honored if you both would be willing to come move in with me," Han stated, a slight hint of a blush visible on his normally stoic features. The silence at the table was deafening, and Izuku nearly jumped in shock as he turned to see his mother crying. Instead of her loud sobbing that she was known for, she was smiling, and had a soft trail of tears rolling down her face. She paused, wiping the tears off of her face. "I would love to, as long as Izuku is okay with it." "Of course," Izuku immediately shouted, practically leaping out of his chair and bringing both Han and Inko into a big group hug. Both of the adults laughed at his actions, but couldn't help but let a few tears of joy fall as the three of them truly enjoyed their company together. And, for the first time in a long time, Izuku felt a piece of his heart he had lost finally fill itself again. Chapter 8. A Test of Skill, Part 1. Izuku opened his eyes to a new, yet increasingly familiar ceiling. His new room at Han's. No, his home on the other side of Mizudafu was a decent bit larger than his old room. He now had space for his bed, a desk, and a whole set of shelves just for his hero memorabilia. His closet was now much larger as well, though he didn't have enough clothes to fill the whole thing. The Midoriyas had moved in at the end of Izuku's time at Aldera High School, with his graduation being the last day that they had went into their old apartment. It took them hours before Inko stopped crying, as she had many fond memories of the place. Not that Izuku could blame her. He would miss it, but he was far more excited to have a change of pace, and a new home that felt more whole. Their new home was a great deal larger, with 2 floors and a small backyard, including a basement. The first floor held the living room, kitchen, laundry room, and office, while the second floor was all bedrooms. Both floors had their own bathrooms, not counting the bathroom Inko and Han had to themselves. They had all been living here for just over 2 months now, and they had settled in as best as possible. Inko was still able to work at her job as a secretary for a law firm, as it was the same distance to work as their old home. Han generally left at the same time she did, though he arrived home a couple hours later since he had to help with the store as well as working at UA and keeping up his duties as a pro hero. Of course, there would be some nights where Han wouldn't be home until Izuku and Inko both fell asleep, but they both pitched in to make dinner and make sure it was ready for when he got home. Overall, Izuku was happier than ever. "Izuku, you're going to be late." "Alright." "Oh crap, the exam," Izuku shouted, practically leaping out of bed at the sound of his mother's voice. He had stupidly forgot to set his alarm, and now he was going to be paying for it dearly. He threw on a pair of tan combat boots and special cargo pants that Han had bought him a while back, as well as a black tank top. He then rushed through his morning hygiene, which was now much easier since he had gotten a new, shorter haircut. His once long and somewhat shaggy green hair was not buzzed short on the sides, and faded into a longer, but not too long cut on the top, which according to his mom and Han looked much more handsome and mature, though Izuku secretly knew Inko would miss fluffing his longer hair. Speaking of his mother, Inko was already setting out his breakfast when Izuku came stumbling down the stairs, his workout bag hanging from one of his shoulders, which was thanks to his foresight to pack it last night. "You have a few minutes, dear," Inko chuckled, as she sat down to eat her own breakfast. Han said that he was leaving UA about a half hour ago, so accounting for morning traffic, he should be here in the next 6 minutes. "Thank you tons, Mom," Izuku stated, giving his mother a kiss on the cheek before chowing down on his American-style omelet. Inko had been able to take up a much more diverse skill set in her cooking now that she had a bigger kitchen to work with, and the healthier options available to her along with working out at the gym with Sarah, Han's sister, had allowed her to lose quite a bit of weight. Honestly, Izuku suspected that his mother was almost strong enough to pick him up again, even if it was only for a moment, which was impressive considering he was nearing a weight of 150 pounds, though he still looked quite lean since he had grown into a height of 5 feet and 9 inches. Right as Izuku put his now empty plate away in the sink, he heard the front door open, and saw Han standing in the doorway wearing his full hero gear minus his mask. "You ready, kiddo? It's time to go." "I'm coming," he called back, rushing out and squeezing his mother in a hug, before grabbing his bag and heading out the door. He caught Han blowing a kiss and a wink at Inko, before he followed Izuku and got in the truck, beginning the trip back to UA. "All right, Izuku, are you ready?" Han asked, turning off the truck as they sat in the staff parking lot. Izuku looked over at the man who has been training all these years, and is the closest thing he had to a father. Instead of answering, Izuku reached over and held Han in a deep hug, surprising the older man, but he returned it without hesitation. After a moment, Izuku pulled back, wiping away the hint of tears he had in his eyes, and nodded resolutely. "I'm ready." So, the two got out of the truck and made their way towards the main classroom building, where Izuku would be taking the written test before getting on towards the exam itself. Han had donned his mask, and it was from here that Izuku would have to remember to only refer to him as Snipe-sensei, which would take a bit of effort, but nothing he couldn't handle. They walked into the main entrance, and Izuku felt a cold chill run up his spine the moment he stepped through the doors, like a small survival instinct telling him to be ready for anything. He immediately took a cursory sweep of the entrance hall, taking into account everything in the room. Cabinets, desk with a sign-in sheet and receptionist, signs on the walls with directions, small rodent in a suit, a girl with long black hair in a ponytail. Nothing out of the ordinary. Wait a minute. Izuku looked down, and met the gaze of the principal of UA himself. "Nice to meet you, Izuku Midoriya," he greeted, his eyes appraising the duo who just entered. "You look to have grown since the last picture Snipe here has shown me of you. It's good to see that you have been training before entering UA." It's nice to meet you too, sir," Izuku squeaked out, the nerves of the day hitting him full force as he spoke to the principal of the nation's greatest hero school. "Now, no need to delay any further, as I believe you are the last one to arrive," Netsu stated, waving his hand toward the desk which held the sign-in sheet. "Go ahead and take your tag from that table, and go take your exams, Mr. Midoriya. I would say good luck, but I have a distinct feeling that it won't be necessary." Izuku quickly bowed and made his way to grab his designated tag, which was a slip of paper which had his room number and name listed on it. He gave one last wave to his mentor, who looked to be in a discussion with the principal, though he did notice and wave back. He rushed down the halls and followed the markers which led him to a room with a door marked Test Room 2 and made his way inside. The room appeared to be a classroom with only 5 other people within. While 4 appeared to be test takers, the last was none other than Cementos. Doing his best to suppress his fanboy habits, he quietly gave his tag to the pro hero and sat down in the last seat with a packet and pencils set upon it. 3 hours later, Izuku was mentally exhausted. The test wasn't anything too difficult, but the sheer number and variety within the questions required him to remember quite a bit of information, some of which he had thought he had forgotten. Though he could tell he was better off than the others who were in the room with him, who looked like they were on the brink of death. Izuku began making his way out of the room when the PA system suddenly crackled to life. "All recommendation applicants, please report to the front of the main classroom building and wait until you are escorted to the practical exam area." So, following the instructions from the robotic voice, Izuku made his way to the front entrance along with the other applicants. Looking amongst the crowd, he saw all sorts of people. A few mutation types, some emitters showing off their quirks, even a girl who had her arms floating around her, which would probably be a transformation quirk, but Izuku wasn't completely sure. As he was looking around, he bumped into someone in front of him, and as he said, "Sorry," almost immediately, he realized this was the girl he saw in the lobby when he arrived. "It's all right, it was my fault for not noticing you either," she stated, giving a soft smile to Izuku as she bounced from foot to foot. Izuku had to take a moment to gather himself, as he was now realizing just how stunning the woman in front of him was. She was wearing what appeared to be a red and black tracksuit, but the sleeves barely went over her shoulders, and the pants had oval-shaped holes cut out of the sides, exposing a decent amount of her thighs. However, her long, obsidian hair and cat-like eyes gave her a regal aura that made Izuku's old fear of speaking to girls churn in the back of his mind. But he pushed through and decided that talking to someone new was the best way to pass the time while they waited. "I'm Izuku Midoriya, by the way. Nice to meet you, I suppose," he said, holding out his hand. She regarded it for a moment in thought, before taking it and replying, "Momo Yaoyorozu, a pleasure to make your acquaintance." He noted the almost scripted way she said that, but filed it away for later as he asked, "If you don't mind me asking, how was the written test in your opinion?" "Well, I would say that the test itself was challenging in nature, but I didn't have too much trouble with it because of the extensive studying I did in preparation," she answered, a look of pride glowing on her face for a moment before returning to the polite smile she had before. "How about you?" So, Izuku talked to her for the next few minutes, as the last of the test takers trickled out of the building. Right before he got around to asking her about the odd design of her tracksuit, a loud voice got their attention. "Everyone, please follow me to head to the practical exam," the pro-hero ectoplasm shouted, mainly so everyone would hear him rather than to intimidate the students. Though, a few of the people closest to him were inadvertently startled by the hero's sudden appearance. Izuku walked with Momo in calm silence, and he looked and counted around 30 students total walking with them. Around them, they passed a couple buildings which appeared to be large gyms of some sort, but as Izuku looked ahead, he saw what appeared to be a walled-off area of some sort. "Once we arrive at Testing Ground Alpha, please listen to the instructions given to you by the proctors and complete the tasks to the best of your ability," Ectoplasm stated, before pressing a button on the wall which caused a large metal door to slide open, revealing an entire rural town which looked like it belonged in the Japanese countryside. From there, everyone separated according to their last names, as called out by several people in suits and sunglasses. They must have been hired by the school to assist in an unbiased acceptance process, but Izuku suspected that the teachers likely still had some say in the final results. Izuku was waiting for his name to be called, when he felt something climb up onto his shoulder at a rapid pace, which nearly made him yelp in surprise, if he didn't realize who it was. Principal Nedzu, why are you on my shoulder?" he asked, craning his head over to look at the large rodent mammal thing who was now standing on his shoulders, with his paw sitting on Izuku's head for balance. "Well, Mr. Midoriya, you are taking a different test than everyone else here," he stated, patting Izuku on the head before pointing towards a small car sitting outside the testing area. "Go ahead and get in there, as we are heading to a different testing area more suited to your quirk." Izuku looked around for a moment and noticed that all the other applicants were already gone. Realizing that this was his only option, he made his way into the passenger seat of the car, as Nedzu sat down in the seat, which was heavily modified so that he could operate it. Izuku set his workout bag in the back seat, and not a moment after he buckled his seatbelt, the car was speeding off down one of the campus roads, Izuku clinging onto the handle above his window as Nedzu laughed maniacally. Within a few minutes, they had arrived at a new testing region, which appeared to be a giant cityscape. Once the car stopped, Izuku gingerly made his way out of the car, taking a moment to thank whatever deities existed that he hadn't died during that insane car ride. "Come and follow me so we can get started," Nedzu stated nonchalantly, locking the car before walking towards the testing ground. Izuku just nodded and began to follow, but before they actually entered the cityscape, Nedzu took a right turn towards a locked door labeled staff only. However, the door opened automatically when they approached, and Izuku followed Nedzu up a flight of stairs into what appeared to be a large viewing room, filled with monitors showing what appeared to be the inside of different buildings, as well as feeds showing the other recommendation students preparing for their tests inside of Ground Alpha. Looking around the inside of the room, he saw many of the teachers Han had informed him about, including Present Mike, 13, Cementos, Vlad King, Hound Dog, and Midnight. He was slightly disappointed that Han wasn't in the room, but it was for the best to keep the decision-making unbiased, if Izuku was correct in his hypothesis. "Go ahead and make yourself comfortable," Nedzu said, pointing to one of the unused couches in the room. "Your test will be a different format than the other students, so you will be taking yours after the others conclude. Go ahead and watch to see who your future classmates may be. Though I ask you remain quiet so the others can focus." Izuku nodded and sat down, looking at the many screens. The other teachers seemed to ignore him, their attention focused on the numerous screens. Deciding now was the best time to rest, Izuku opted to pull out a bag of beef jerky and an energy drink from his pocket, as well as one of the special nutrient bars that was high in protein for his quirk. From watching the different camera feeds, he could tell that this was likely some sort of race, as he could see the finish line on a few of the cameras, as well as the fact that the students were lining up in a single line in their groups preparing to go. He spotted Momo won one of the groups, as well as that girl who was able to make some of her limbs separate from her body and control them as they floated. Suddenly, all of them appeared to shoot off, immediately leaving the camera's point of view. The feed on that screen suddenly switched, showing them moving down the street. He was shocked to see that the green-haired girl had split herself into numerous pieces, which were all flying down the street faster than the others. Momo, however, was now riding on a skateboard, which he had no idea where it came from. Izuku heard some murmuring coming from the teachers, and looked to see a screen filled with what looked to be torrential wind and ice. Once the feed changed again, he saw a boy with two-toned hair sliding on a growing ramp of ice, and another boy literally flying within a large tunnel of wind. Izuku was absorbed into the footage, his mind working to analyze and explain how different quirks worked, and how they could be used to improve the chances of their users improving or winning. By the time the races had finished, Izuku was worn out mentally from analyzing every single student as much as he could. His biggest regret was that he could write none of it down, as he didn't think to pack one of his notebooks into his bag. "Midoriya, right?" Izuku startled at the gruff voice calling his name, and looked over to see two crimson eyes staring at him from the inside of a well-used sleeping bag. "Yes," he replied, slightly unnerved by the man. "Interesting," the man grunted, emerging from his sleeping bag and standing to his full height, revealing himself enough that it finally clicked in Izuku's mind that he was looking at Eraserhead, UA's resident underground pro hero. It seems that Snipe has a good eye for potential, but we'll see just how good you are once we wrap up the regular exam. As much as Izuku wanted to be happy with the praise he just received, he gulped at the piercing gaze the pro hero gave him before heading over to the other teachers. The group of heroes appeared to be gathering and organizing notes they took and putting them in folders. Izuku immediately realized that whatever his test was going to be would start soon, and rushed to his bag to devour some of the special nutrient bars he had been getting through his doctor. Luckily, his doctor had managed to get it added to his mother's healthcare plan for a much lower cost, making them affordable enough for him to have a decent stock of them for days he knew he was going to be pushing his quirk to its limits. Sure enough, the moment Izuku had finished drinking an electrolyte-heavy energy drink to wash down the nutrient bars, he felt a familiar weight crawl up his back and onto his shoulder once again. "Preparing yourself, I see," Nedzu commented, taking a look at the drink he just consumed. "Good planning on your part, which is better than some of the students I saw in the prior test." "I was told to be ready for anything," Izuku stated, turning his head slightly so he could see the mammal of a man. "Preparing is one of many important steps one must take when in hero work," Eraserhead said, drawing Izuku's attention towards the teachers who were now gazing at him. "Well, I must say that from the look of those muscles, Snipe has been bulking up our little test-taker quite a bit," Midnight said, with a sultry tone in her voice, finishing with a lick of her lips. A deep laugh came from the imposing figure of Lad King as he stepped forward to get a good look at Izuku. "I'm more interested to see what techniques the boy has up his sleeves," he said, giving a wide grin towards him. Now everyone," Nedzu spoke up, silencing the room. "Let's not get Midoriya here too anxious with your expectations, as I would rather not have that impact his results too much." At that, Izuku perked up, as he suddenly realized that he had no clue as to what he was doing. "What will my test be, since I didn't partake in the race like the other recommendation students?" "Ah, of course," the principal exclaimed, hopping off Izuku and making his way to the wall of monitors. He tapped a few different keys into the console by the screens, and they all shifted to show a singular image of what looked to be a partially constructed office building, with 4 floors in total. Then a few of the screens on the left switched to show images of what looked to be bipedal robots of highly differing designs, with their exteriors either painted black or white. All of the designs were nothing like any of the leaked images of robots from the regular Hero Student Practical Exam, or robots used in some of the UA Sports Festival events. "What you will be doing, Mr. Midoriya, is clearing this entire building of the hostile robots shown here, and rescuing the hostages they have taken," Nedzu stated, a maniacal gleam shining in his beady eyes. Chapter 9. A Test of Skill Part 2. Izuku now stood in the middle of the giant mock city he now knew was called Ground Beta, and down the street in front of him lay the construction site his test was going to take place in. His earpiece buzzed to life, making him want to itch it before the voice of Principal Nedzu spoke. "Your test begins once you enter the building, and do keep in mind that the robots aren't capable of killing you, but they can definitely dish out some serious damage if you aren't careful." Izuku just sighed before clapping his hands onto his cheeks, giving the light sting he needed to pull all of his thoughts together. The basic rundown of the rules he got beforehand were: save as many hostages as possible. Destroying a hostage bot will be a deduction from his final results. Destroy all villain bots, but the leader of the villain bots, who will be easily identifiable, must be taken down using non-lethal means. The test ends if he takes longer than 30 minutes, incapacitates all of the villain bots, or becomes incapacitated himself. All in all, the rules were simple. However, the glimpses he got of the villain bots when he was in the viewing room gave him the feeling that they weren't to be taken lightly. He did hear one of the teachers mumble something about a good test for the prototypes, which only made Izuku more worried about how dangerous the robots were. Izuku reached down towards his cargo pants and grabbed the zippers hidden by a small Velcro strap on both sides, pulling them down so they revealed most of his thigh. He immediately began producing 9mm magazines from his legs, watching as patches of his skin turned gray. The patches began to shimmer slightly before the metal objects began sliding out. Grabbing the finished product, He stuffed them a few of his cargo pockets before producing around 24 shotgun shells, with half of them being slug rounds rather than regular buckshot. Now focusing, Izuku produced an MP5 from his arm and a KSG shotgun from his leg. He retrieved both before they could fall to the floor and slung the shotgun, preloaded with buckshot, over his shoulder with a sling attached to it, and attached the MP5 to his pants, which had specially strengthened loops put at the waist for that purpose. Before heading in, he made sure that the special earpieces he was given were secure, as they were sound dampening to prevent hearing damage, and made sure the safety glasses he was wearing were strapped onto his head properly so they wouldn't come off. With all his preparations complete, he began moving towards the construction site by staying as close to the buildings on the street to keep his cover maintained, assuming that the villain bots could see outside the windows, that is. Interesting, Netsu commented, watching the camera feed of the street Izuku was walking down. We didn't tell him that the robots were looking out the windows, but he assumed they were to be safe and took the slightly slower but more logical route for such a situation. He's thinking about the situation like it would play out in a real scenario and acting accordingly, Aizawa stated, getting a few murmurs of approval from the other teachers. Izuku peeked around the corner to get a look at the building. From what he could see from this angle, the first floor appeared to be fully constructed, while the others were less constructed the further you went up. There were no villains on the roof, but he could see a few dark silhouettes moving about in the interior of the building. But he knew that he wouldn't be able to get a clean shot with the weapons he had created. While he could make a longer range weapon, it would likely only be useful for taking down 1 or 2 villain bots, and that was a waste of energy and nutrients. I need a point of entry, Izuku thought, taking a look at the exterior construction site. He spotted a few window panes on the first floor that weren't installed yet, and he was able to make a path to them while retaining some cover in the form of stacked pallets of wood and piping. Izuku waited until he couldn't see any shadows near the exterior of the building before making his way towards the entrance point, staying low in case they spotted him, which in all honesty wouldn't be very hard. Upon reaching the unfinished windows, Izuku immediately raised the MP5 and swept it across the room, which appeared to be a small meeting room. Clear. Moving towards the door, Izuku put himself flat against the wall and slowly opened it, getting a look at what appeared to be a large office space that appeared to take up a little over half of the first floor, with 3 other doors in the room. It was then he noticed a few of the villain bots marching about the room in what appeared to be set patterns, their red eyes giving a slightly ominous glow to the dimly lit room. Seeing that there was nobody else in the room, he took a deep breath, focusing on the subtle thuds of the robots moving about the room. Then, after a moment of preparation, he raised his weapon and opened fire. Holy shit, those bots lasted 10 seconds at the best, Midnight mumbled, watching as Izuku quickly made sure all of the villain bots were out of commission. Yeah, weren't those things supposed to be Myheroacadeemia's special robots he made for the 3rd year since the old designs weren't cutting it? Hisashi yelled, his glasses sliding down his face. Not so loud, Mike, Vlad King scolded, crossing his arms. But yes, these were supposed to be stronger robots specially designed for indoor combat. It's not that the robots are weak, Netsu chirped, getting everyone's attention. It's just that we have all forgotten just how powerful guns can be in our quirked society. Izuku put a burst of rounds into the 3 robots, their AI not able to respond fast enough before their circuitry became shredded by the bullets. He rushed across the room quickly, taking a quick glance at each of the destroyed bots before approaching the 2 doors on the furthest side of the room, which appeared to head into smaller rooms like the one he entered. Deciding to head left first, he nearly got hit by the door bursting open, revealing another villain bot with a long tail and a stinger at the end, its dangerous tip already lunging towards Izuku. He quickly ducked downward and shot twice into the tail, severing it on impact, before charging the robot into the wall and letting 2 more rounds into its chest. Not getting a moment to breathe, the door behind him shattered as another bot punched through it, the fists on the robot much larger than the others. Not having time to bring his gun up, Izuku tugged on the dead robot he just shot and dragged it by its arm to be in between him and the newcomer, using its shell as a shield so he could back up. He aimed and fired right as the other villain bot punched its fallen comrade out of its path, only for it to be met with another tight burst of lead to its face. The moment the bullets hit it, the glowing sensors meant to act as eyes immediately shut off. Izuku quickly reloaded, sliding in a fresh 30-round magazine to ensure he was ready for any surprises. Checking the 2 rooms the villain bots burst out of to find them both empty. He felt his earpiece click to life again, the squeaky voice of Principal Nedzu coming through. 5 minutes have passed since you entered the building, Midoriya. Best get going if you want to clear it all. Izuku didn't bother responding and immediately made his way to the last door in the room. He heard the sounds of moving machinery on the other side and decided his prior approach wouldn't work, assuming that the robots were as alert as the others were now that he has made his presence known. In his head, he sifted through all of the images of items he could create, like a library of images that could pop into the front of his head at the snap of his fingers. Then, he found what he was looking for. Grabbing the hilt of the small weapon that slid out of his arm, he held it in his offhand, the MP5 readied in the other. Izuku slid the door open and fired the single-shot grenade launcher into the other room and waited for the telltale crack of the flashbang going off. Busting open the door, he saw that there were 4 villain bots and 1 white civilian bot that was bound by duct tape. The reception room he just entered was large enough that there was no way he could get all of the villain bots fast enough before the effect of the flashbang wore off, so he did what every hero must do: prioritize the rescue. Izuku dashed towards the room, gunning down the 2 villain bots guarding the hostage behind 2 upturned tables. He slid forward on the tiled floor and pulled the bound hostage down to the floor to be fully behind cover. Just in the nick of time, as several rubber bullets and an electrified capture net sailed over the cover they were crouched behind. Izuku put the submachine gun over the table and let loose a wide spray. Taking a slight peek out, he saw that the bot equipped with the arm cannon that likely shot the capture nets was deactivated, and immediately went back into cover as he heard the gun the other robot had spun up before letting out another prolonged spray of high-speed rubber bullets that chipped at the edge of the table. Izuku dropped his now empty MP5 and pulled up his shotgun. Sliding a shell in the chamber, he quickly shot up and blew the head off of the villain bot before it had the chance to charge up a burst of its own gun. He ejected the spent round, before spinning around and training the gun at the stairway at the back of the room, the sound of footsteps coming closer. He flicked a switch on the bottom of the shotgun and switched to the tube loaded with slug rounds before loading the shell, a special perk of this model. The footsteps became incredibly loud, and a hulking, obsidian robot lumbered down the stairway. Izuku fired one of his slug rounds, but was surprised when the metal projectile became embedded in the armor of the robot. Izuku suddenly realized that this one was likely meant to represent some sort of transformation or mutant-type quirk, as the robot began its advance with little pause. Izuku looked the robot up and down and noticed a glaring weakness: the joints. Like any armored foe, they can only have so much protection before their movement is hindered. Izuku quickly retrieved another slug round and slid it into the open chamber, as he had a feeling he would have to make them count. He sprinted, ducking under the swiping arms of the behemoth, the robot standing at easily 7 feet tall. He swung the KSG around and let a round loose into the hip of the robot, blowing out whatever motors and connections were used for controlling the robot's left leg. He had to quickly roll out of the way, as the entire torso of the robot span rapidly in a full circle, its arms swinging with enough force for Izuku to momentarily regret the choices that led him to take this test. Putting these thoughts aside, Izuku took the moment the robot was preoccupied with copying ROB's side B attack to fire another slug in its head, which to his satisfaction stopped the robot. Though, the moment he saw the lights behind its eyes begin to flicker back to life, he sent the last 3 slugs he had loaded into its face, the rounds finally crumbling the faceplate of the robot, making it fall over. Izuku let out a sigh, still maintaining his awareness, but decided he had a slight moment to reorient himself. The first floor was now clear, as the only places he could go from this reception area was up the stairs to the second floor, or out the actual entrance to the building, which he could now see would have put him in a wide-open area, as all of the furniture was moved towards the back half of the room, where the 4 villain bots he had destroyed earlier were set up behind ample cover. He walked back to where the white robot was and quickly tore off the duct tape binding before retrieving his MP5. As he reloaded both of his weapons, the hostage quickly left the building, stopping once it was near the street. Nedzu silently grinned as the teachers all talked amongst each other as the exam carried on. He knew that a few of the teachers disapprove of his decision to put Izuku Midoriya in his own specialized test, though they reluctantly agreed when he gave them his reasoning that his quirk was both nearly useless in a race and had much more use when combined with his skills when put in a situation where it could be used, so they settled on a format that benefited everyone, while putting Izuku in a much more difficult exam than what the other students took part in. At this point, he could care less about the flack he would get from Power Loader for stealing his prototype designs without his consent. Not that any of the other teachers knew that, of course. This was all working towards the teachers seeing the potential this young man had. While this may seem like bias from an outside perspective, Nezu knew that Izuku had the skill to make it into UA, but he needed as many allies and mentors as he could get. After all, Nezu knew the very dangerous consequences of having a quirk like his could do to someone trying to be a hero. Izuku quickly made his way to the second floor, slowing as he approached the new area. He quickly came up the last few steps, sweeping his MP5 across what appeared to be a large area of half-built workstations and pallets of materials. The windows here were only partially finished, with the only lighting being the sunlight coming in from outside. Tied to one of the support columns near the other side of the floor were 3 civilian bots. Taking another look around the open floor, Izuku jogged towards the hostages when he suddenly felt his instincts scream at him in time for Izuku to jump over to the side, avoiding 2 giant hands trying to grab him. Looking up, Izuku saw a robot that may or may not give him nightmares tonight. Coiled around the support bars within the ceiling, as what looked to be some sort of insect-like robot, but each of its 6 arms had large hands that looked big enough to grab him, and even completely immobilize him if 2 of them caught him. Its red sensor eyes, well, looked more like a large red visor that covered the top half of its head, likely giving it an enhanced range of vision. Before Izuku could raise his gun, however, it dropped down from the ceiling and rapidly charged him, making him start dodging just so he didn't get captured by the insectoid machine. Izuku dove over stacks of bricks and slid under work tables just to avoid the 2 front arms. Thinking quickly, Izuku reached behind him and began raising his shotgun and threw his MP5 at the villain bot. Took the bait, swiping the gun out of the air with both of its front arms. Izuku grinned as he aimed his shotgun, just for one of its middle arms to suddenly shoot forward with compressed air, latching onto the barrel of the KSG as he pulled the trigger. The middle section of the hand was blown out, with some shrapnel lodging into the armor on the torso of the robot, but not piercing through enough to cause any damage. Izuku quickly released his gun and began running again, as the original distraction wore off, leaving the front 2 arms free once again. Flying through his mental archive once again, Izuku quickly decided on a plan C as the robot began closing in on him once again. He lifted up his tank top and retrieved the 3 canister grenade launcher that slid out of his chest, and immediately fired all 3 rounds into the room. Diving into the thick plumes of smoke being generated, Izuku hid under an office desk while he concentrated on making the next weapon he would need. He could hear the insectoid robot thrashing about the room, knocking apart pallets and tables within the room. Izuku slid out from under the table and spotted the dark silhouette of the robot near the stairs. Raising his American M16 rifle, he let loose a full magazine of 5.56mm ammo into the metal exterior of the villain bot. He could see the bullets pierce small holes through the smoke as it began to dissipate, with all of the rounds hitting their mark. He moved forward as he reloaded a fresh magazine from his arm, and looked down at the sparking carcass of the dead robot, its body and head littered with bullet holes, as well as 2 of its arms severed completely from the higher caliber rounds. Izuku made his way back to the hostages and was thankful that all of them were relatively unharmed, besides a few scratches to their paint from when the insectoid robot was thrashing about in the smoke. Not a moment after he released them, he heard the earpiece give some static before Nezu once again gave him an update. "You have 14 of your 30 minutes left, Midoriya. Chop chop." At that, Izuku immediately spurred to life, the slight ache of his muscles being pushed aside at the realization he had less than half of the time limit left. He looked about the room and spotted another set of stairs, hidden away behind the only finished wall in the room. He retrieved his shotgun, reloading the shells so that it was ready to go. Izuku looked around for his discarded MP5, and saw that the gun looked to be bent and twisted from the robot's grip. Izuku sighed and quickly made a new one before making his way towards the staircase. Izuku prepared another single-shot flashbang as he went up the stairs, fully expecting to see another packed room of enemies. To his surprise, the next floor was almost completely barren, besides a few random wooden boxes. Though, right before Izuku lowered his guard, those boxes exploded outward, revealing several small, 4-legged robots. Izuku took no time shooting the 2 closest ones with his MP5, leaving 3 more in the room. Suddenly, the small quadrupedal villain bots began to shoot small darts toward him, which Izuku promptly went back down the stairs to dodge. Izuku hated needles, and those darts looked like they could knock him out if a few managed to hit their mark. Izuku shot the flashbang behind him to cover his retreat, before letting an explosive shell slide out of his palm to promptly be shoved into the canister launcher. He turned towards the stairs when he came back into the 2nd floor, looking in time to see the flash of light that came from the flashbang at the top of the stairs reflecting off the walls. He aimed the launcher, and within a few seconds, the 3 robots came barreling down the stairs to be immediately hit by the shrapnel of the exploding shell. Izuku took cover behind one of the brick pallets and looked back over to be satisfied by the sparking remains of the shredded bots. He made his way up the stairs again, and immediately spotted the last set of stairs on the other side of the floor, with no hostage bots present anywhere he could see. Almost done, Izuku stated to himself, quietly in case the villain bots that were upstairs could hear him. He was lucky that he wasn't caught off guard by the tranquilizer villains that were on this floor, as even if he managed to beat them without getting hit, he would have problems completing the final floor. Also, this floor had to have the leader of the villain bots on it, though Izuku was wary of exactly what would make the leader so easily identifiable compared to the others, when every group of villain bots he had encountered were fairly unique in design. Remembering that he had to merely incapacitate the last bot, Izuku took off his tank top momentarily to create a large net gun, which had electric wiring attached to it which would allow Izuku to shock whatever was caught in the net should he wish. It was one of the designs Han had gotten at his request for a form of non-lethal takedowns. Sadly, it was likely the only non-lethal option he had which would work against a robot, as rubber bullets and tranquilizer guns would do nothing against plated metal and servos. Slinging the net gun over his shoulder, Izuku was fully prepared as he began stepping up the last flight of stairs. His MP5 trained on the end of the stairway in case there was a trap waiting around the corner. Instead of a trap, however, he was greeted by a large open room, with some holes in the ceiling, letting in more rays of light. At the center of the room, laying in the light of a larger hole in the ceiling, there was a single hostage bot lying on the floor, bound by rope to keep it from escaping. Izuku didn't dare take another step, as this whole room was screaming trap. He looked quickly to each of the holes in the ceiling, awaiting the moment something dropped down from them. The rest of the building was completely empty, and this floor only had support columns in it besides the hostage and stairs. After what felt like a full minute of tense silence, Izuku realized that the leader wouldn't show itself until Izuku fully entered the room, or made a move to rescue the hostage. He suddenly felt an idea brew in his head, which may put him at a slight disadvantage, but also might draw out the leader without Izuku being fully in the open. Creating another single-shot launcher, Izuku fired off a smoke round towards the middle of the room, a thick haze filling a third of the 4th floor. After a moment, Izuku saw a humanoid shape quickly drop down from the hole above the hostage. The sound of it landing on the floor echoed slightly. Izuku noted that it definitely had a different color scheme to it than just black when he saw it drop from the ceiling, and decided to prepare his net launcher instead of the MP5. Right as Izuku was about to fire, he heard a voice pierce the silence that overtook the room. "Sorry, hero, but you won't save the day that easily." He froze, watching as the smoke slowly faded to reveal Han in his full hero costume, minus his small cape in place of extra armor on his arms. He was standing in a ready position, holding the hostage bot up as a shield and an electrified baton to its neck. "Looks like your gamble backfired on you, but it was a solid plan to draw me out," Han mused, chuckling slightly under his mask. "Now, you have to figure out how exactly you are going to stop me from either killing this hostage or walking out of the building scot-free." Izuku began to wonder exactly how he was supposed to separate his mentor-turned-villain from the hostage when Han suddenly charged straight at Izuku with the hostage in hand. Responding in kind, Izuku went to slam the stock of the net launcher into Han's mask when he stopped and threw the hostage with all of his momentum, forcing Izuku to roll out of the way of the robot, considering Han was immediately following up with a thrust of the baton. Izuku grimaced as he quickly bounced back to his feet, the clang of the robot hitting the floor ringing from the stairway. That moment of contemplation, however, forced him on the defensive as he ducked and weaved to dodge swipes from the stun baton. One of the swipes nearly got him in the hand, forcing Izuku to drop the net launcher to ensure he wasn't knocked out from the crackling electricity coming from the tip of the blunt weapon. Izuku began to construct a small taser gun in his hand, which Han immediately noticed and sent a strike right at Izuku's head, which Izuku ducked under just to get grazed by another stun baton Han had retrieved with his other hand. The shock that traveled up his right arm caused him to drop the stun gun right as it finished, the object falling to the floor. Luckily, Izuku thought ahead. He reached down to his left thigh where a second stun gun had just finished and whipped the gun around to shoot Han, just for his mentor to spin on one heel, sending out a low kick which knocked Izuku over in his off-balance state. Izuku accidentally pulled the trigger as he hit the floor. The electrified barbs bouncing harmlessly off the armored bracer Han was wearing on his right arm. Rolling to his side, Izuku threw the used weapon straight at Han, which he instinctively dodged as it was headed for his head, giving Izuku the time to get on his feet and quickly back away. Izuku created a third stun gun in his hand, but the moment he made a movement to aim it, he was hit hard by a small, but dense object in his temple. Izuku grunted in pain as his vision went blurry for a moment before he felt a second object hit him in the middle of the forehead, causing him to fall over as he felt two small trails of blood run down his head. Lions win. Izuku slowly opened his eyes again when he heard the principal's voice come through for a moment, to find Han kneeled by him and cleaning his face with some gauze. "Damn Izuku, you really had me backed into a corner there," Han said quietly, looking over Izuku to make sure he wasn't hurt too badly. "What did you do?" Izuku asked, wincing slightly as his voice gave him a bit of head pain. "I ended up having to use my quirk to take you down," Han whispered, gently moving Izuku's head so he could clean the second wound on his right temple. "I'll explain later. I think I might have given you a concussion from the way you flinch whenever either of us speaks." Izuku just nodded, a mild throbbing pain going through his skull as Han gave first aid to the two places his head was hit by whatever Han sent his way. After a few uncomfortable minutes, he felt someone kiss him on the head, with his pain immediately disappearing, just to be replaced by a heavy wave of exhaustion. Izuku groaned as he refocused his vision, seeing a small old lady looking down at him next to Han. "Are you feeling better, dearie?" the elderly woman asked, watching Izuku rise shakily to his feet. Izuku looked at her for a moment, before realizing that this was the youthful heroine herself. "Recovery girl. Thank you for the treatment, recovery girl," he stated, resting his body on Han for support as the man offered his shoulder. "I just feel incredibly tired now." "That makes sense, considering that head injuries usually take a bit more stamina to heal," she replied, rummaging a hand in her coat pocket. "Not counting the fact that you just completed that sadistic principal's exam." She placed 2 gummies in his hand, which Izuku promptly ate to get any form of energy back. She nodded with satisfaction before she began walking away, Han nudging for Izuku to start walking. "So what exactly did you hit me with?" Izuku asked, attempting to start a conversation to force his mind to stay active until he was somewhere he could comfortably pass out. "Well, kid, I had to use a couple of these," Han said with a hint of amusement, reaching into one of his pouches to show Izuku a few steel bearings rolling around in his hand. "I didn't tell you that my quirk works on objects I throw, did I?" Izuku gaped for a moment and recalled a very old conversation when this very topic came up, and Han had in fact mentioned that he could control the trajectory of any moving object that comes from his person. "Trajectory is just a bit overpowered sometimes, sensei," Izuku stated, going down the stairs with Han's help. Han just laughed and helped Izuku walk back to the observation room in comfortable silence. "That was quite the wonderful show you put on for us, Midoriya," Nezu complimented, watching the teacher-student duo enter the room after the elderly nurse. The other heroes in the room said small little compliments as well, though Izuku wasn't quite coherent enough to catch all of them. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Izuku said, the exhaustion evident in his voice, the extreme usage of his quirk, muscles, and healing with Recovery Girl all weighing upon his energy reserves. "Well, we teachers have to review the footage for all of the recommendation students, so you two are free to head home," Nezu stated, giving both Han and Izuku a paws up, because he didn't have actual opposable thumbs. "Thank you for letting me be here," Izuku said, with a small bow before grabbing his duffel bag sitting on the couch where he left it, Han went and had a few words with the rodent man before following Izuku out the door. He walked with Han back to the truck, as he had finally regained enough energy to walk on his own to the truck. Though, the moment he set his bag in the back seat and the calming purr of the engine began, Izuku was out like a light bulb. Chapter 10. Downtime. For starters, Izuku most definitely didn't remember falling asleep on the living room couch. What he did remember, however, was passing out in Han's truck after that ridiculously hard recommendation exam practical. He would have to ask Han if that was his idea or Nizu's, just for future reference. He slowly pulled himself up, noting the stiffness in his whole body as he got his bearings. His gear from the entrance exam was laying next to the couch, with his boots also sitting there as someone had taken them off before laying him down. Izuku looked behind him when he heard a door open, and saw his mother walk out of the bathroom door in the hallway. "Izuku!" she cried, immediately crushing him in one of her tight hugs, which have been growing notably stronger over the last several months. "Han said that you passed out because of Recovery Girl healing your injuries. He said that they were just a few bumps and scrapes, but I still couldn't help worrying." Izuku just chuckled as he hugged her back, reassuring her that, yes, everything is okay. Before pulling out of the hug, he decided against telling her that the majority of his injuries came from Han for his own sake. Better to have him owe Izuku a favor than laugh at his suffering should Inko have her way with him for hurting her son. "Speaking of Han, where is he?" Izuku asked, looking around for any sign of the man. "Oh, he came in to say hello and drop you and your stuff off before heading back to work," she replied, though he did say that he would be quite busy at UA for the next week or so, considering he has to go through the applications for all of the other students. Izuku nodded in acknowledgement, not envying any person who has to work under Nizu for a living. "How about I help you with dinner?" he offered, giving his mother a bright smile to match the one that appeared on her face. "How about you go get cleaned up first? Then we can cook that katsudon I promised to make." Nothing could get him moving faster. The next week, to say the least, grew worse every day that Izuku was left waiting in anticipation. When Inko said that Han would be busy with work, he didn't expect that to mean that Han would not only barely respond to any texts he sent him, but that he wouldn't even come home during this week. When he asked his mother if she knew anything, all she would say was that Han is just being overworked by that principal, but otherwise he is fine. Frankly, that didn't do much to calm Izuku down. That wasn't to say he was worried about his mentor, but he desperately wanted any sort of information on what the results could possibly. If not that, then at least some sort of training exercise, research, or literally anything to do to keep his mind off of the package that was supposed to be arriving in the mail today. Currently, he is sitting on one of the kitchen stools, chewing on the end of a pencil as he took notes on the recent formation of the MT Lady Hero Agency and their struggle with paying for the damages caused whenever the heroine went to her full size. "Izuku." He wrote down a few ways she could limit the costs of her work on the line pages, theorizing how fast she could shift between sizes or even grow, and then immediately shrink before reaching full size to get a half to quarter power hit off without causing her full size strength to leave cracks in the street. "Izuku." Maybe he should send an email to her agency about it? It wouldn't do to just figure this out to not help out the hero while she was still in the positive regarding her income. If she wasn't careful, the Hero Association may start taking more than it gives to deal with the insurance companies. "Izuku." He yelped in surprise as he felt a wood ladle lightly whack him on the back of the head, pulling him out of his stupor as he noticed the steady sound of metal hitting wood. Looking down, he realized that the floor around him now had enough .50 caliber casings scattered about to supply a designated marksman with an overzealous trigger finger for a few hours. "You have to figure out how to stop doing that when you zone out, honey," Inko sighed, already sweeping up the stray bullets and putting them into an old ammo box that they used just to store whatever bullets Izuku produced when he was incredibly nervous or zoned out. Though in this case it was both, which would explain why this batch of fresh bullets filled the can by about a third, which only left a little space at the top for a few extras. "Sorry, Mom, the nerves are getting to me?" he trailed off, as he heard the doorbell ring throughout the house. Inko rushed to the door and opened it to find a large letter sitting in the mailbox outside the door. Looking to see who it was from, she nearly dropped it when she saw the bold UA logo printed upon it. "Izuku, it's here," she yelled, skittering back into the house as she attempted to not fall over as she quickly met her son, looking just as excited. Do you want to open it on your own or dash? Let's look together, Izuku stated, guiding his mother to the couch. The two settled into the cushions, staring down the imposing logo before Izuku quickly tore it open, jumping when a metal disc fell onto the coffee table. He was about to pick it up when it suddenly flickered to life, startling the two Midoriyas. I am here! Both Inko and Izuku's eyes bulged out of their heads when the imposing form of the number 1 hero filled the projected hologram. You may be wondering why All Might is in your recommendation decision message, young Midoriya, and it is because as of this school year, I shall be a teacher at UA. Now, going on to the results of your exam. There are none. Izuku was confused for a moment, watching as All Might talked with someone off-screen before suddenly bouncing back, the confusion now gone from his angular face. Well, according to the records, you earned a 98% on the written portion, putting you in the second rank among your fellow recommendation candidates. Well done. Izuku, I'm so proud of you, Inko whisper yelled, squeezing his hand reassuringly as the message continued. For your practical exam, however, it appears that Nedzu had set up a special test for you. According to a review done by all the teachers, they unanimously agreed that you should be accepted into the hero course. Izuku nearly started crying right there, but he attempted to back until the hero finished talking. Izuku Midoriya, welcome to your Hero Academia. As the hologram flickered off, every attempt at resisting his emotions failed as both he and his mother began crying on the couch. Izuku brought his mother into a hug as they let out every ounce of water they had in their tear ducts. The door to the house bursting open jostled the two out of their emotional hug, turning to see Han breathing heavily against the doorframe, looking like he just ran a few miles on sleep, reaching far into the negative hours. His long gray dreadlocks were all tied up in a messy bun that looked to have a few crumbs in them, and his eyes had bags that could hold the contents of the fridge and then some. Shit, I just missed it, didn't I? He groaned, letting his head thump into the door before slowly moving towards the other two. Yeah, you did, Izuku chuckled, with Inko just sighing before getting up and giving him a soft hug, not wanting to strain him any further. You need to go get cleaned up, honey, Inko said quietly, giving the man a quick kiss before flicking a few of the random bits out of his hair. I love you, but we can't have a nice family celebration when you look and smell like a homeless man. He huffed in what sounded like amusement, before sliding his way over to Izuku, ruffling his hair. I'm proud of ya, kiddo, Han stated, giving him a small smile. Thanks, Dad, Izuku replied quietly, the older man's eyes widening for a moment before a small tear ran down his face. Before either man could say anything, Inko hurried Han along to shower, a few tears of her own still flowing even though she looked like the happiest woman in the world. As it turns out, Han was dead tired. The moment he had gotten himself cleaned up, he passed out on the recliner in the living room, soft snores echoing through the house. Inko decided that now was the time to get started on dinner, and Izuku asked to help her. They had agreed that they would read the rest of the letter after dinner, so Izuku put all his energy into helping his mother cook the gargantuan amount of katsudon she had planned on making to satiate the hunger of her two favorite men. They were just finishing with the plating when Han meandered into the kitchen, wearing a comfortable pair of sweatpants and a loose t-shirt depicting a chibi Godzilla and King Kong fighting. Go wash your hands, dear. Izuku and I will finish setting the table, Inko stated, with Han only replying with a smile as he washed his hands in the sink. The family had a fairly quiet dinner, as the events of the day made themselves known by just how exhausted they all were. The moment everything was cleaned up, the family migrated to the couch and looked at the letter which still lay on the coffee table. Go on and read it, bud. It's got some interesting stuff in there for ya, Han said ominously, chuckling to himself as he looked over Izuku's shoulder. Izuku nodded and retrieved 3 different papers from the envelope. Deciding to go in the order presented, he started with the one on the top. He began reading the first page, which he quickly realized was a reiteration of what All Might had said, but more professional, if the signature of Principal Nizu at the bottom had anything to say about it. Flipping to the second page, he quickly realized this was definitely not something he should skip over. First of all, it was a personal note from Nizu, Secondly, it detailed changes to his curriculum and schedule ordered by the Chimera himself. Not only would he be taking his regular 1A classes, but instead of art and history with Midnight, he would be taking a specialized course with Nizu himself. Also, he had an extra class added onto the end of his class schedule was the third-year firearms class taught by Han. I'm guessing that you had some input in this? Izuku chuckled, giving a pointed look at Han, who surprisingly shook his head. Nah, he had already finished your schedule by the end of your exam, Han stated, chuckling as well. I'm a bit worried about how he's taken an interest in you, actually. Having that principal focused on you is bad for anyone's mental stability. I'll be careful then, Izuku shuddered, thinking about whatever schemes the reportedly sadistic principal had. What's on the last paper, Izuku? Inko asked, now looking at the two papers he had set aside on the table. He looked at the last sheet and found that it was a list of instructions and a list of items to bring for moving into the dorms on campus. Giving them a quick look over, he was grateful for the note at the bottom saying that weapons were allowed in the dormitories as long as the staff were made aware of their presence and were approved. He hopes that the teachers won't mind him bringing along a veritable armory of weapons he was certified to have as a concealed carry, and the few non-firearm weapons he had just for fun, like a few of his bows and slingshots. After explaining the specifics to his mom, they all decided that he should move in on the first day possible, which was the day after tomorrow. That way, he could get settled in and have some time to explore the campus so he wouldn't get overwhelmed when he had to go between various buildings for his additional classes. Well, we can worry about packing tomorrow, so how about I get that ice cream in the freezer and we watch some of those American action movies you two love, Inko stated, clearly not taking no for an answer as she got up from the couch. Make sure you grab the tub of Rocky Road Darlin', Han called out, grabbing the TV remote and tossing it to Izuku. You get to pick out the movie tonight, son. Izuku decided at this point that today was the best day of his life so far. After a full and moderately emotional day of packing, the morning of the move arrived. Izuku and Han had just finished loading the last box full of Izuku's books and blueprints as Inko tried to prevent their driveway from flooding with her tears. I'm going to miss you so much, she cried, squeezing her son in her arms. You can come by after classes end anytime, Inko, Han soothed, handing her another box of tissues. Though I would advise against visiting too often. We don't need his fellow classmates to think you're some crazy helicopter mom. Izuku huffed appreciatively as Inko cried harder. The thought of having to limit herself to how much she could see her son paining her very soul. It's all right, Mom. If you really want, I can come to visit you instead. Oh, okay? She agreed, doing her best to compose herself before the pair left. I won't make you do that too often, but I expect you to text me every night to let me know you're okay. Sure thing, Mom, Izuku replied, stepping back as Inko relinquished her hold of him. All right, it's about time we head out, so I can get to work on time, and so Izuku has time to unpack, Han stated, bringing the other two into one more group hug. Stay safe, you two, Inko said, watching as the men got in Han's truck and drove away. I don't remember seeing these here last time I was here, Izuku said, getting out of the truck in front of several floor dorm building. While he did remember seeing dorm buildings on campus when he came last, the building in front of him and the one to the left of it most definitely didn't exist. Well, you'd be correct, Han answered, turning the truck off and putting his mask and hat on to complete his costume. Cementos built these after the recommendation exams took place. The old dorm buildings were destroyed because of outdated security systems and utilities that would cost more to replace than to just build a whole new building. I know you mentioned not wanting to reveal your identity to any of the students, but wouldn't having you help me move into the dorms be suspicious? Izuku asked, opening up the back of the truck and pulling out the first of several boxes. I say it's best they know I have a favorite student now than later, Han laughed, slapping Izuku on the back before taking a box himself. Izuku just shook his head with a smile as they walked through the front doors of the dorms, to find that there was nobody there, which wasn't surprising considering it was only 9 in the morning. The common area was quite spacious, with a large lounge area by the television, as well as a large kitchen and dining area. He made a mental note to see what the fridge and pantry had stocked so he had an idea of what to make for dinner. Not wasting any time, the duo quickly unloaded all the boxes from the truck and moved them up to Izuku's room on the 3rd floor. Han stated to shoot him a message if there were any problems, and drove his truck away to go to work, leaving Izuku alone in the giant empty building. As he was in the process of taking stock of the food that was available before he went to unpack the boxes, he heard the front door open to see a certain onyx-haired woman make her way through, followed by a group of men carrying pieces to what looked to be an absolutely massive bed frame. He waved as she spotted him. A small smile graced her features as she strode over and sat down at the counter, letting her moving crew get to work. "Not feeling like getting in the way of your crew, I see," he said, leaning on the counter across from her after retrieving an apple from the fruit basket sitting on the counter. "Yes, I felt a bit guilty about it, but they assured me that everything was handled," she said, taking a look back as the men worked quickly, bringing in box after box in what looked like a trail of ants, even though there couldn't have been more than 6 men. "There's no shame in accepting help from others, Yayarosa-san," Izuku stated, sliding the fruit basket to where she could reach. "No need for the honorifics, Midoriya. We are all going to be working together to be heroes for the next 3 years, are we not?" she asked, taking a banana for herself after appraising the small selection present within it. "Sounds good to me," he chuckled, taking a bite of his snack as he did his best to ignore the bit of anxiety at the fact he was casually talking with such a beautiful woman. "How long have you been here by yourself?" she asked, her cat-like eyes gazing at him softly. "Not too long. My mentor came along to help me get unloaded before he left, and I decided to come see what the kitchen had to offer before heading to unpack," he replied, taking another bite of his apple. "I wanted to see specifically what food options they had that were high in metal and vitamins, as my quirk can burn through the stores in my body quite a bit if I overuse it, to ensure I have a constant store or those I have to eat quite a bit every day." As he talked, he noticed how she seeming lit up with interest, practically bouncing with suppressed excitement on her bar stool. "Does your quirk happen to be a creation emitter type?" she asked quickly, her question laced with her energy. "Heh, right on the nose," he answered, giving her a smile as he put his hand out and let a small squirt gun design he found online fall out. "Oh my goodness, what are the odds that there are 2 of us in the same school, much less the same class?" she stated jovially, clasping her hands together as she gave him a stunning smile. "My quirk is simply called creation and allows me to make any non-living object I want as long as I know the exact chemical and molecular structure." Izuku's eyes widened in surprise, as the possibilities for such a versatile quirk flooded his mind. Deciding to hold back his flood of questions, he replied in kind, "That's amazing. My quirk, Gunsmith, lets me make any projectile weapon as long as I've at least seen it in an image or in person, and have a basic understanding of how it operates. It's not nearly as versatile as yours is though. Yours just makes mine look rather trivial in comparison." "No, don't say that," she quickly denied, shaking her head back and forth. "Yours works with much less knowledge of what you are making. While I have to spend a large amount of time researching and studying anything I wish to make, that means that you have a much larger selection of items you can make on the fly, while I have to keep up my studies constantly just to not forget a list of objects, while others I would have to re-research in the field should I end up needing them." Izuku's mind went blank as he admired the sheer intelligence of the woman in front of him. He had tuned out slightly as she continued defending his quirk, all the while just making him even more interested in exactly what she was capable of. In a rather rash decision from his shock, he put his hand out in front of him, stopping her mid-sentence as she shook the offered hand, albeit slightly confused as to why. "Yaoyorozu, you can just call me Izuku from here on out, as I have a strong feeling that we will be working together quite a bit in the future, as fellow creation quirk users," he stated, giving her a blindingly bright smile of his own. She smiled back, this time her happiness reaching her eyes as well. "Then you could call me Momo, and it would be my pleasure, Izuku." The two ended up spending the next 20 minutes discussing the hardships of maintaining a healthy food intake for their quirks while staying physically fit, until Momo's moving crew finished and left them to their own devices. They both ended up heading to individually unpack their rooms, though neither did notice one other recommendation student move into the dorm while they worked. By the time Izuku had finished setting his dorm up, the sun was beginning to go down outside and it was almost 6 p.m. It was also at this moment that the grumbling of his stomach made his hunger known. Wiping the sweat off his forehead from finally putting together the shelves of hero merchandise he He looked about the room and admired his work. The cube shelf unit he had just finished now housed the majority of his hero collection that he had brought with him, where a few other odds and ends were in other places throughout the room. In the furthest corner from the door, next to the shelves, is where the gun safe he had brought resided, holding the few guns he had brought with him, while the bows hung from a rack above it. The walls had a couple hero posters condensed around the shelves, while the rest had various blueprints of his favorite weapons pinned up. His desk was set up on the same wall as the door, with his books he had brought along stacked up next to it. He had replaced the blanket on the bed with one of his more comfortable ones he brought from home, and he put the extra blankets in the closet, which was now full of casual outfits, exercise clothes, and an empty ammo box for the day he inevitably began sweating bullets in his room and needed somewhere to put them. Taking one last look, he decided that it was completed, and began working his way down to the common area. On the flight of stairs, however, he came face to face with another person with white and red hair split down the middle, walking out of the second floor. Hi," Izuku greeted, giving a small wave and smile. "Hello there," the other boy greeted, giving a nod but otherwise not changing from his neutral expression. "I'm Izuku Midoriya, and I was planning on making some dinner downstairs if you felt like joining me, though I don't quite know what to make yet," Izuku offered, rubbing the back of his head as he weathered the steady gaze of his new fellow dorm mate. "That would be nice, and my name is Shoto Todoroki. Thank you for offering," he stated, motioning for him to lead the way. Izuku began walking with Shoto, and they quickly reached the open lobby to see Momo gazing at the contents of the pantry herself. "Hey Momo, you feeling ready for some dinner yourself?" Izuku asked, causing her to jump slightly before looking in his direction. "I was indeed, and I'm Momo Yaoyorozu, as we haven't been acquainted yet," Momo stated, reaching her hand out to Shoto, who promptly returned the gesture. "Shoto Todoroki, and could we have cold soba?" he asked, looking at the two of them questioningly. Izuku almost missed it, but he saw a slight shift in his posture when he asked the question, almost seeming hopeful for a moment before pushing the emotion down. "I know how to make that if it sounds good to you?" he asked, looking at Momo, who have a nod in affirmation. "Well, I'll get going on that," Izuku stated, quickly moving and taking out the necessary ingredients and utensils. "I should be done in about 20 minutes, so you two can do whatever. I've got it handled." The other two looked at each other and shrugged, opting to take a seat at the island while Izuku went to work preparing the dipping sauce. Momo and Shoto talked quietly as Izuku cooked the noodles, and sure enough, there were plates with a mound of noodles and a few different sides to go with them in exactly 20 minutes. As the two began eating, Izuku realized that he and Momo would probably need more, so he set the remaining noodles on a plate in between the others and began cooking another set of the noodles for himself, watching happily as his two fellow dorm mates enjoyed his cooking. "Where did you learn to cook, Izuku? This is quite delicious for such a simple dish," Momo asked, and the way Shoto looked at him inquisitively begged the same question. "Both my mom and dad have spent the last few years drilling into me the necessary skills to take care of myself. It just so happens that both of them insisted I be excellent at cooking so I could make food for them if they felt lazy. Though that has yet to happen." Izuku chuckled, remembering every time he would be pushed out of the kitchen when he attempted to cook for his mom. "Well, you could win any lucky lady's heart if you cooked for them like this every day," Momo stated, taking another bite of her noodles and sighing contentedly. Izuku blushed slightly, but quickly pushed it aside as he set out his plate, taking the finished noodles and digging in himself. The trio spent the next few minutes eating silently, satisfied with just enjoying their meal in the quiet atmosphere of the mostly empty building. They were pulled out of their reverie, however, as the front door opened to reveal a shaggy-looking man in a black shirt and sweats. They all stared at the newcomer as he walked over, giving an appraising look at the three of them, though his eyes lingered on Izuku before he spoke. "I'm Shota Aizawa, and am the advisor for this dorm, as well as your homeroom teacher when the school year starts. Seeing as you three are all of my recommendation students for this year, I would like to state that you will be pushed harder than your peers, as the staff all found you to be the top picks from the exam." Pausing to scratch at an itch, Aizawa continued, "As you have all received training before coming here to UA, I will also expect you to do your best to help pull your fellow students up to your level, as it is illogical to leave the others and only focus on yourselves. Besides that, I appreciate that you haven't burned the building to the ground yet. I'll leave you to your meal, but Midoriya, I would like a word in private. The students were left speechless as the man simply walked back towards the front door, not waiting for Izuku to go with him. He quickly stumbled out of his chair and managed to catch up right as his now identified teacher opened the door and stepped outside into the cold night air. Izuku stepped out as well and closed the door behind him, and turned to be face to face with the imposing man. They stared each other down for a moment, before Aizawa spoke up again. I believe you realize at this point the hardships you will face as a hero with your skill set. Snipe is a logical enough man to have kept you well informed of that. Yes, sir, he has, Izuku replied, gulping involuntarily as the other man's gaze narrowed before he sighed. I just want to tell you that I will do my best to ensure nobody harasses you because of your style of fighting, but I will need you to tell me if anything comes up while I'm not around, since that would be in direct violation of school rules, Aizawa stated, before turning and walking back towards the main campus. Go and enjoy your dinner, kid. You have a long year ahead of you. He called back, not turning to look at Izuku as he obliged and went back inside. Izuku's thoughts lingered on the subject of his teacher's words. Yes, he was aware that many people were against the idea of a hero using firearms, and among those there were people who would outright slander those heroes, believing them to be cowardly or villainous for using such weapons for fighting. While Han hadn't brought that discrimination up in a little while, he knew that his father figure has had his own share of trouble with people regarding his quirk, which is exactly why he keeps his face hidden from the public eye. He looked over at his two classmates, and wondered if their thoughts of him would change once they saw how he fought. Shoto seemed like the introverted type, so there was no way of telling, but Momo, she already praised his quirk. She saw beyond what it could make and spent time talking with him about all the other aspects people usually ignore. After all, quirks were a part of your body, and had repercussions to using them no matter how small. As he watched her eat her meal, Izuku decided to believe that Momo wasn't the kind of person who would change their opinion of someone over something like that. Maybe that was why, deep down, he was growing to like her, though her beauty and intelligence definitely didn't hurt either. Chapter 11. Companions. Izuku rubbed his eyes as he sat up, looking around at his new dorm room before slowly stretching slightly, enjoying the slight pop his back made before deciding it was time to get up. As Izuku wondered what he should cook for breakfast, his eyes widened in surprise when he looked at his clock by his bed. 10:30 in the morning? Geez, I guess Mom wasn't kidding when she said I needed an alarm clock, he uttered to himself, now deciding to hurry up and get his day moving. Inko or Han always ended up waking him up before 8 every day to try and keep him on a sleep schedule, but his body must have decided to rebel against the institution instead now that they weren't around. After spending a bit of time getting changed and brushing his teeth, he made his way downstairs to the first floor, spotting Momo reading a book on one of the couches. She noticed him walk into the common area and gave him a small wave which he reciprocated before returning to her book. As Izuku was about to go make a bowl of cereal since lunch was rapidly approaching, he heard the front door open and looked to see a person walk in with several boxes precariously balanced in their arms. Noticing that the topmost box was a few seconds from toppling over, Izuku ran over to assist. Here, let me give you a hand with that before something falls over, Izuku greeted, taking the top two boxes out of their hands to reveal a girl with wild pink hair and matching skin. He made note of the small horns protruding from her head, as well as the very unique black and gold eyes staring at him now that they weren't hidden behind her belongings. Hee hee, thanks for that, she exclaimed, shooting him a bright smile as she made her way inside the dormitory. The name's Mina Ishido, but you can just call me Mina. What's yours, Greenie? Izuku chuckled slightly at her happy demeanor and replied, Izuku Midoriya, and you can call me whatever you feel like, Mina. Cool. Also, I hope you wouldn't mind helping me move the last few boxes of my stuff in, she said, setting the other two boxes she was holding down by the door. Of course. Izuku then ended up helping Mina move the rest of her belongings upstairs. Momo ended up assisting them as well once they had brought all of Mina's boxes indoors. By the time they had finished moving everything, it was almost time for lunch. I'm pretty hungry, ladies, and since I was planning on making some sandwiches, would either of you want me to make you some? He asked, noticing the way the two women perked up at the idea of food. Well, I'd hate to ask you to dash. Absolutely. Izuku chuckled at Mina shouting the answer for both of them, Momo blushing slightly but giving him a nod of affirmation. The trio ended up making their way back to the kitchen and enjoying their lunch when the doors opened once again to show Izuku a familiar family. Katsuki, don't expect me and your father to carry all this crap for you. Hurry your ass up, Mitsuki Bakugo shouted as she walked through the door with a bag of clothes. I never asked for your help, old hag. I can do it myself, her son replied, matching his mother's aggressive attitude as he walked in with several boxes of his own. Izuku chuckled as he watched the Bakugas make their way into the dorms. The other students present merely watching the situation with surprised eyes. Don't worry about it, you two. That's how they normally are, Izuku stated to the ladies he was eating with, setting his sandwich down to go greet them. Oh, if it isn't Izuku, how are you doing? Masaru Bakugo greeted, sliding past his wife and son. Izuku, it's been so long, Dedesh, Mitsuki began, turning to him and pausing. Damn kid, what the hell has Inko been feeding you? Last I remember you were a little string bean. Nice to see you too, Mr. and Mrs. Bakugo, and for your information, she's been feeding me a lot considering how much nutrients my quirk and training eat up. No kidding, kid. Well, I've got to help my son here get unloaded before I get all sappy, she replied, tussling Katsuki's hair, which he surprisingly didn't try and stop. I don't need any more help, Deku. Go enjoy your damn lunch or whatever, he grumbled, glaring at Izuku as he turned away to get another set of boxes. Rough as usual, though I suppose I should be happy that he let us help him move in, despite him constantly trying to do the work by himself, Masaru stated, sighing as he began walking back out of the dorm. It was good seeing you again, Izuku. I hope you have a good time here at UA. Mitsuki dittoed her husband as Izuku said his goodbyes, making his way back to the kitchen island where the last slice of his sandwich lay untouched. You know them, Izuku? Momo asked, looking over at him as she reached for her last remaining slice. Yeah, you could call them family friends. Bakugo got his roughness from his mother, but they all are good people, he stated, taking a bite. Well, I'd have to say that Bakugo got some of his mother's killer looks, but that attitude is a major turnoff for me, Mina said, putting a finger to the corner of her mouth. You, on the other hand, are only shooting higher up my list for these delicious sandwiches, she smirked, enjoying the way Izuku choked slightly on his food before composing himself. Thanks for the compliment, Mina. I'm just glad I inherited my talent for cooking from my parents. The rest of the lunch was rather uneventful, with the trio making some small talk once they finished. Katsuki had brought all his boxes upstairs and never came back down, as he was probably going to spend the rest of the day unpacking. Izuku was about to explore the campus a bit when his phone suddenly started ringing. He excused himself and walked away, answering the call. Hey kiddo, how's college life going so far? Han said, the sound of papers shuffling moving in the background. It's going well, Dad. I've made a few new friends already. That's great. Now, I was giving you a ring because I just finished getting your costume design submitted, but Power Loader wanted to have you come in at some point this week for a final fitting, as well as to approve a few minor changes he wanted to make, he stated. Sounds all good to me, Izuku replied, looking out the window towards the campus proper. What time should I head over to the support lab? He said that he would give you a call later this week, once he finishes up some of the third-year costumes, as well as some other support mumbo-jumbo he mentioned. Okay, I'll keep my phone by me then. Anything else? Just wanted to say I love you, Izuku. Now go on back to your friends. Oh, and do give your mother a call before she decides to come over here herself. Izuku chuckled and replied, I will, and I love you too, Dad. Hanging up the call, Izuku made his way to the couches where the girls plus a spontaneously appearing Shudo were now watching some sort of nature show. The rest of the week went by in a bit of a blur, as between new people showing up every day and everyone trying to stave off a lingering boredom of not having anything to do, life got a bit repetitive. Izuku found that he was waking up later than he normally would, but still made an effort to get up around 8 in the morning so he wouldn't be suffering when classes came into session. Mina and Bakugo actually ended up hitting it off, as he had finally found a rival in eating spicy food. Nobody knew why, but every day they ate some horrid concoction of a meal that grew spicier by the day. Shoto had made a mistake when he saw that they had made cold soba and assumed the dipping sauce was safe to consume. Momo had luckily been on site to administer emergency first aid as he writhed on the floor in betrayal, seeing as his favorite food was now turned toxic by the two demons enjoying their meal. A trio of guys named Kirishima, Satu, and Kaminari arrived at the dorms, which quickly livened the relatively quiet dorms. Izuru Kirishima was manly in every sense of the word, being that when challenged to see whether he or Satu could carry more boxes, he ended up carrying his boxes, Satu's boxes, and Satu himself. Well, he did for about 2 steps before he was crushed under the oppressive weight. Rikido Satu was actually fairly calm, but he looked like he could bench press at least a few of the fellow members of Class 1A. Surprisingly, he was a very good baker, and he even promised to help teach Izuku some recipes if Izuku taught him a few of his own. Denki Kaminari quickly asserted himself as the easygoing type, even if he did try to flirt with all the girls with varying degrees of smoothness. Overall, though, Izuku liked every one of them. The following day introduced more quirky individuals, including a very French Yuga Aoyama and soft-spoken Koji Koda. Aoyama was about as flamboyant as humanly possible, but Izuku could tell he only had good intentions hidden behind his never-ending supply of glitter. While Koda was the perfect incarnation of a gentle giant, Izuku was able to learn quite a bit about him, mainly being his extreme love of animals and fear of insects. Izuku would never forget how loud he screamed when he saw a spider sitting on the kitchen counter. The last 2 move-in days, however, were by far the most chaotic due to the fact that the dorms doubled in population. Izuku didn't interact with everyone, but the few he did interact with were interesting by every means. Tenya Ida was a rule follower by heart, but had motives that fit just about every good aspiring hero to be, though Izuku swore that he knew that name from somewhere. Ochako Uraraka and Tsuyu Azui arrived at the same time, and Izuku ended up helping them move up to their rooms while the other guys were off doing weightlifting at the school gym. While Uraraka appeared to be too amazed by everything to fully focus on conversation, Azui, or Tsu, as she told Izuku to call her, was blunt in a weirdly endearing way. Thankfully, Uraraka's quirk, zero gravity, made it a relatively painless process. People actually took turns helping newcomers to their rooms, which is why Izuku only caught glimpses of a petite girl with long earlobes and a massive guy with 6 arms moving in. Also, he could have sworn an invisible girl moved in at some point, but he must have just missed her. At the moment, Izuku was relaxing on one of the chairs by the TV, closing his eyes for a bit as he listened to the idle conversations around him. How many more people are supposed to be joining the party again? Kaminari questioned, flipping through what sounded like a magazine. Dunno, man, though it shouldn't be too many more today, Siro replied. I'd say around 20 with how much time is left in the day, seeing as that rocker girl and Shoji, I think his name was, are unpacking in their rooms right now. Well, UA accepts 40 hero core students every year. Ida began, the swings of his robotic arms audible enough for Izuku to imagine them. So I'd assume your estimates are correct, Siro, though I moo dash. It's okay, Ida, you don't need to go into the full explanation, man, Kaminari interjected, already wary of the long-winded explanation that was about to happen. Well, I do believe it is important to. As the group in the common room kept on going with their conversation, Izuku felt his phone start vibrating in his pocket. Looking at the caller ID, he quickly made his way to the currently empty kitchen area and answered, Hello. Hi. Is this Izuku Midoriya? Yes, it is, he replied. Ah, good. This is Power Loader or Majima-sensei if you prefer. I do believe that your father told you ahead of time, but I need you to come by the support department as soon as possible, so I can sort out your hero costume sorted out before the school year starts. Perfect. I'll head right over, Izuku answered, hanging up the call. Making sure he didn't need anything, Izuku left the dorm while shooting a quick wave over to the common area if anyone noticed him leaving. The support department's area wasn't too far from the dorms, but he figured he would be there in about 7 or 8 minutes. He quickly looked at his phone to check the time though, as he was planning on having lunch soon, seeing as it was about 1 p.m. And he had already put dinner in one of the slow cookers, he figured that he'd be alright for just a late snack if this took a while. Damn, I could have at least grabbed one of the protein bars, Izuku grumbled, walking up to the imposing iron door of the support laboratories. As the gate slid open, the sound of a few different people tinkering on different devices echoed out, though Izuku could clearly see it was just a handful of people actually present in the giant room. Ah, Midoriya. Right over here. Izuku looked to the back of the lab where the form of the pro-hero power loader was working on some sort of robot with a number 3 painted on the chest. Making his way over, he nearly got trampled by a girl with pink hair sprinting from one side of the lab to the other with a fire extinguisher, putting out a small fire on one of the work tables. "Watch where you're running, handsome," the man scolded, getting the attention of the girl. "I don't need you injuring yourself or another student because you can't be mindful of your surroundings." "You got it, sensei," she called back, giving him a thumbs up as she went to work cleaning her station of the fire-retardant foam. "Sorry about that," he sighed, looking back to Izuku now that he was next to the man. "Hatsum there is an incoming first year like you, but that bright mind of hers sometimes shunts basic safety in place of her work." Izuku chuckled as he looked at the girl for a moment longer. A large pair of steampunk goggles pulled over her eyes as she started taking apart some sort of contraption on the table. Her arms were covered in grease and a bit of soot, along with the black tank top and cargo pants she was wearing. "Yeah, she does seem like one of the wilder types. Anyways, let me get these forms out for you," Myjima stated, moving over to a much cleaner desk with drawers full of papers. After shuffling the contents around for a moment, he came back with a large folder. As he set it down on the work table, Izuku looked with excitement as he saw the professional schematics and blueprints for his costume get pulled out, as well as a few extra documents. "As you can see, not too many changes had to be made to your submitted design," he explained, pointing out a few spots on the papers. "All we ended up doing, for the most part, was changing materials you requested since some newer and more sturdy fabrics are now available, as well as making it a bit more ergonomic in design." "This is amazing, sensei," Izuku replied, enjoying the fact that the costume he had worked on with his parents was deemed suitable for hero work. "Though I did change up the headgear you requested, as some issues with a hero in Okinawa ended up changing the design requirements and recommendations for costumes," the engineer said, pulling out another couple pages with a revamped version of the facial protection he wanted. "As you can see, we ended up making you a separate mouth protector/respirator combo, as well as an upgrade for your visor to give you a wider range of vision while ensuring the sides are able to keep most particulates out of your eyes. The change works for me," Izuku